to this first Audit Risk and Assurance Committee of 2021. As attendees and indeed anybody else joining us live stream will know that during the COVID restrictions we are live streaming. We are working remotely, but all boards and committees are live streaming, and the video sits on the website thereafter. So welcome to everybody. Draw your attention to a few points of information and guidance with which you'll be very familiar by now. We've all got the participant guidance. I'm sure everybody's read it, has the information about contingency options, and in terms of the chair's contingency option, in the hopefully unlikely event that I am disconnected. I was going to say Matt Smith, but I'm now going to work to an even more flexible contingency option, and Grant McRae is going to take over. And in the even more unlikely event, then I think Lynn will step in and we will just have to reconfigure. Fortunately, and I hope this is not a hostage fortune, we haven't had to invoke any of those provisions in previous ARAC meetings. So in the usual format, if you could keep yourselves on mute, do raise a hand, and I will try and keep an eagle eye on hands raised in the course of the discussion. We have got some indicative timings which I've circulated to those attending, and so for public information, the intention would be to have a lunch break at about 12:30, and we would have finished with the public session by 2 o'clock, when we'll take a short break and then deal with the remaining items in private. So with those preliminary provisions, can I then turn to the actual formal agenda? And first of all say welcome, and in terms of attendance we have Grant McRae. Has Matt yet joined us?
He's not, he's just trying to get in, hopefully.
He will be joining us,
yes.
But the board members, the committee members are Grant McRae, myself, so we are quorate, and Matt Smith, who will be joining us shortly. From the SPA, we have Lynn Brown, our Chief Officer. We have John Nellis, we have Graham Stickle, Karen Valance for the full meeting, and then we have a number of different staff members joining us for additional items, and I think I'll introduce them as we go along, and Karen can note that for the record. From Police Scotland, we have David Page, we have James Gray, Andrew Hendry, Alistair Caulfield, Fiona Miller, Martin Tierney, and ACC Spears, who've been gluttons for punishment, are here for the full meeting. And also for the full meeting, we have, of course, Gary Devlin and Andrew Diffin from ASETS, formerly Scotland Creef, our internal auditors. We have Gillian Woolman.
We actually have Matthew Swan rather than Andrew Diffin, and Matthew Swan is the audit director because Elizabeth Young is on mat leave. It's just to keep that right. Okay, thank you very much. That's Karen will note that for the record, and we'll see as well as hear him, I'm sure, in the course of the meeting. Gillian Woolman and Pauline Gillen from Audit Scotland, and Dave Hare observing from HMICS. I think that's a full record as we start the meeting. Okay, so we don't have apologies, said Matt possibly joining us slightly later. Declarations of interest, essentially Grant and myself. The minute from the meeting then on the 15th of September for approval. Any comments, any amendments? Are people content? Yes. Thank you very much. The action log, which is relatively short, and indeed proposed to close. The first, the Equality and Human Rights Assessment, content.
The internal audit wellbeing report, proposed to close. And that is something that has been pursued by the Resources Committee, that's an appropriate closure here. Yeah, okay. Joint working, now that is one which is proposed to close, and is something I know from discussions has considerably progressed. Lynn, are you, in the sense, Lynn, are you content to close that? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Moving on then to, give me a moment, decisions taken since last meeting. I don't think the ARAC has taken any decisions. It's really in decision-taking mode. And finally, a decision on taking items in private. It's proposed to take items 7 and 8 and 9 in private. Reasons given, content. Thank you very much. Moving on then, very quickly, to audit and improvement progress. And in the usual way, we have reports from assets from Police Scotland, from the SPA. So I think in the first instance, Gary, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just taking myself off mute in the usual way. Chair, Matthew Swan is going to talk through a number of reports. I'm going to be talking to the audit plan and the benefits realisation report, and Matthew is going to be talking to the other reports. So, so Matthew.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Chair. The progress report is relatively straightforward, and I certainly won't go through in a huge amount of detail, other than to kind of just highlight for the benefit of the committee that our work remains on track, in line with what we've communicated to you previously. The couple of bits that I probably want to specifically draw your attention to is the addition of a review in relation to home working, which is currently under discussion and replaces the previously planned corporate governance review. And we're working with management at the moment to commence that work to enable us to report as things stand. As you'll appreciate, to some extent, that's still a bit of a work in progress, and we'll update you in due course as that progresses. The other point that I would just want to mention in relation to the progress report, which changes from versions you've seen previously, is the additional appendix which summarises the other work that we've done out with the internal audit plan as an additional appendix, which I understand has been requested to be received as a matter of course going forward, and that will be included in future progress reports. There isn't anything else that I particularly want to draw to the attention of the committee, but would very much welcome either any comments from management, members of management, or indeed questions from the committee on the paper.
Chair, can I just raise one issue in the paper? There is, on the KPI section, there is a REDS, the RED KPI, and that's around management responses. It's just to know, I don't think there is a big issue here. The two reports that are referred to are really complex reports, and we are in a COVID time, and I actually think management respond really well to internal audit reports, but it is out with the KPI definition. It just, you know, when you see a red, I think it's right that we draw your attention to that, but my view on that is that that's not something that we as the internal audit team are concerned about. Okay,
thank you, that's very helpful to know, Gary. It does leap out, but I can understand that explanation and rationale. Grant, any questions, comments from you? Grant, you're on. Grant, inevitably.
Apologies.
Had to happen.
No, I do welcome the Appendix 2. I think that's extremely helpful to get that. No, and no other comments on it. It's a very clear, informative report. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Andrew Hendry.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was just to ask the question around the homework and security one, just to confirm that that is definitely in planning status, because there's a number of emails and communications going around at the moment between people within Police Scotland. I'm just wanting to check with Gary and Matt that is currently still being planned. You know, otherwise, if they can maybe detail who the kind of point of contact is at the moment, if possible.
I'm
I
sure
think
that.
best to answer that.
Sorry.
I just thought Matthew Swan is probably closer to the where we are in planning that and could answer.
Okay, Matthew.
No, thank you, Chair. The situation on that one is we'd engaged with SPA management just before Christmas and recently kind of had approval over the last couple of weeks that the scope of that was going forward. I don't actually have to hand the specific names that we've got, but if you let me check my emails over the next few minutes, I can come back to that and just double check that, and I'll pop that in the chat on the meeting if that's okay. Just confirm that for you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you. But for the purposes of the minute, it's confirmed that is going ahead, that the scope is now agreed and it will be proceeding, and it's to quite a tight timetable, as I recollect, having seen the scope. Was it to report for May, or am I confusing it with another one?
No, that's correct, Chair. That's the timetable which is in the assignment plan for that review. We do completely acknowledge that that is a tight one and compressed as much as possible with the view to reporting that to the next audit committee, but with a slight caveat that we are working to a condensed timetable from that, and we will keep you posted if and when there's a need to change any dates on that as we engage further.
Okay, thank you very much. But I mean, I think I'm really pleased to comment that I think, Gary, this is the first occasion on which the internal audit has been completed within the reporting year, within the year that we'd intended. So that's a real improvement, I think.
Yeah, I'm absolutely delighted about that. This is the first year where we're really on track to deliver the annual audit opinion to the May meeting. So we'll finish all of our work, I think, by the end of April, if not by the end of March. And actually, I think that goes a long way to the improvements in both the SPA and Police Scotland. So those structures are really supporting the internal audit effort, and you can see that coming through, I think, in the progress report.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And I think that's a good thought to carry in mind when we look at the internal audit plan for the coming year. Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on then.
Chair, just to say, I've joined you now. I do apologise for not having been with you earlier. The system just didn't let me in, or I didn't let the system in. I don't know which, but I'm here now. Thank
you. Well, it enables us to test how flexible we are by inviting Grant to take over as our contingency, which I hope we won't need. So thank you very much. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we move on to item 2B, which is ASAC's reporting on management progress on the outstanding internal audit actions and plans. Matthew, are you going to take this, or is Gary going to take this?
Oh, this one's me as well, Chair. Again, I'll take it as read that the report has been read by the committee, so I won't dwell on a huge amount of detail in relation to the report itself. There's one point of clarification that I would just like to make in relation to paragraph 2.3 on page 2 of the paper, where we note that there was one action where we hadn't received a response in relation to a joint working review. Just to confirm, we had a response from SPA in relation to that matter. It was the Police Scotland response that we were waiting for, but the action does remain open, but just wanted to make sure that's clear as possible for the benefit of the committee. Other than that, the main thing that I would want to draw to the committee's attention is an overall general comment that reasonable progress is being made in relation to the completion of actions, and primarily those actions which I would want to generally draw your attention to are those of an older nature, which we are looking at and keeping on top of alongside management. The biggest chunk of those in relation to the aged actions relates to non-pay expenditure, and we have ongoing work in relation to those matters. Indeed, a review which is due to start over the next couple of weeks in relation to that. So it's something that we are very much have our eye on. There isn't anything else that I would particularly want to draw to the committee's attention, but again would welcome any comments specifically from members of the management team, or indeed questions from the committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Grant, any comments or questions from you?
Thanks, Chair. I would just like to home in on the actions in relation to non-pay expenditure to do with procurement, which actually say that the revised timetable really for them is all to be completed by the end of this month, which is just a few days away. and I just wonder if we're actually going to meet that timetable.
James?
Thanks, Chair. So there has been substantial progress made on procurement on non-pay expenditure controls over the past number of months. So that's the kind of the foundation for then launching the P2P system. So, you know, making sure we've got purchase orders, documented processes. Some of the processes where the controls are a bit upstream from where it hits the system. So we've made sure all that's documented. So I am anticipating that, you know, that will be picked up by the internal audit review, and you know, they'll note that substantial progress has been made. Is it complete from a P2P perspective? It won't be. We have got the system up and ready. We're planning to launch it on Thursday in E, J and N divisions, and from there we'll roll it out further. But for the areas where it hasn't been launched, the kind of the manual controls, if you like, have been significantly strengthened over the past number of months. So the latest report that I had, which was last week, was saying that we think we've gone from a kind of fairly low level of compliance around purchase orders to being somewhere up around 90%. So obviously, I mean, I'm not preempting what's going to happen. All that I can do is give you a comment from me, which is I think we've made substantial progress, and we'll await the internal audit review to validate the actual position.
And I suppose worth observing, I mean, there's been a degree of intense scrutiny of procurement in the context of COVID around PPE. So that's been a sort of, you know, a real testing of the systems, not across the board, but in some very specific areas. Yeah. Thank you. Grant,
Chair, can I just come back on
sure.
James? I fully understand what you've just said. I just think that actually, if the reality is it's going to be maybe the end of March before it's actually going to be complete, or a later date, it might be quite useful to just actually come up with a realistic date, so that we're not always continually chasing this until it is complete. I totally understand the progress being made and the challenges at the moment. I'm just keen to sort of not give the wrong impression that it's going to be complete by the end of January, if in fact it's really going to be a later date.
So that's fine. We can take that away and have a look at that. I mean, what I would say is I would hope that whilst the actual P2P system isn't out across the entire organisation, that the arrangements we have in place for the effective control of non-pay expenditure will be complete by the end of this month. So, but just not in the sense that, you know, so before there ever was such a thing as P2P, you know, you could still control your expenditure, non-pay expenditure well. That's something that has been an area of weakness for us. We think that's something that we have addressed. It gives us that good platform now to launch the P2P system next week and roll it out from there. So from a control of non-pay expenditure perspective, I feel a lot better about it than I did if you went back to last summer. But obviously the thing we want to do now is just get the system out to make it more efficient. So I think we're well controlled, but not as efficient as we might be. But that efficiency is the next step. But we will look at the recommendations and adjust as required. Thanks.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew, are you closing off this particular subject or moving on to a new one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I may, it's just slightly just kind of adding to some of what James has just said. A big part of our follow-up process is actually about looking at has management action addressed the risk that was originally identified in terms of what we recommended at that point in time. And what James is explaining there from my perspective is that intent to make sure that the previous weakness has been addressed. Admittedly, there may still be some way to go on the PTP point, but we can consider that and report back to the committee in due course on where exactly that sits. But I'm very comfortable with James's summary of that, and we will test that during the course of the upcoming review to close that off as appropriate.
Okay.
Thank you, Matthew. I think that's a particularly useful point because it was something I was thinking about as we looked at the proposals for the internal audit, the next internal audit plan, and to what extent we can do some of the complete follow through that says you identified the risk, the actions have been complete, but has that actually addressed the risk, or have other things happened, but the effectiveness of the impact of this process is perhaps something to be reflecting on in our considerations about future internal audits and/or simply reviews and presentations, assessments to this committee. I think it's a really useful point. Thank you. Matt, had you any?
No, I'm reassured from what I've heard, Chair, so thank you.
Okay. So I had a question, or perhaps a comment. No, one comment, one question. One is by way of question. We've got assessment here of and reports on what actions have been completed, what are past their current date, and you've indicated about the different dates you've put in. You've put in a March date where you hadn't received from those being audited a revised due date. But what about the bit in the middle? Is there any way in which you can give us an assessment? I see that the SPA has we've given a rather useful table of things closed, overdue, and what's an assessment of things, as it were, in flight. So just, can you give any sense of how comfortable you are that the vast body of, in fact, of the recommendations are likely to be met in time? Gary, is that?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think internal audit are able to give you that assurance. I think that's a management assurance. Mm-hmm. It's hard for us because management are in control of the resources that would either deliver the assurance or not. I mean, you know, what we're doing is checking for you that the action plan that you have agreed are being delivered on time and reporting back where they're not. You know, I don't know. I think it's for management to say whether or not they're exactly on track.
Just to understand the process, so you're just looking at the point, the end point. In other words, if it's due in March 2022, you're not looking mid.
Yeah, so an example of this in practice would be the impact of COVID-19. So in previous meetings, Police Scotland have said we've had to delay the implementation of some improvement actions and because of COVID-19, and that's pushed some back. And then the audit committee are able to come to a view about whether that's a reasonable rationale for delays in implementation or not, because it's a management resourcing prioritization decision, and you know that's out with internal audits wheelhouse, if you like.
Okay, thank you, James.
Thanks, Chair. It was just to say that, you know, there are well-developed processes internally within Police Scotland to manage this it's done on a monthly basis. So, you know, at the SMT that I have, we would discuss progress, and there's good engagement with Donna Adam in that team as well. So, whilst, you know, the formal kind of follow-up by ASITs is done once we declare it completed, there's quite a rigorous regime internally to make sure that things are progressing, and it doesn't come as a surprise if we're not hitting the date. So I can give you an example for the non-pay expenditure, and why I have a relative level of comfort over that is that I was having weekly meetings with the team to go over every one of the actions and progress against them, and that was on a weekly basis. So that things aren't just left and then we find out at the end. I can just give you that assurance that it is well managed internally.
Thank you. I'm very comfortable on that. I think on the financial controls. I think I'm slightly less comfortable, and I'm not sure this is the place to answer that, but I just comment that the actions overdue, of course, well, not surprisingly in view of the subsequent internal audit, the post-implementation review of resource allocation model, and what is said at number page 21. It's a grade 3. Well, the review of the resource model is complete. However, the review revealed months of work to operationalise. And I think that becomes very relevant when we come to benefits realisation and efficiency now, as it's, because this is your report. This is where you've put in a revised date of March 21 because you haven't seen delivery. But I think I would like to understand the relationship between the resource allocation model, benefits realisation, and the new, what is it, design, demand and resource board, which the Chief Constable is going to chair. So it's something around both the architecture, the governance architecture, which is highlighted, but also what's the data on which the board, that board is relying, what's the information on which that board is relying, seems to me germane, but I pick it up because resource allocation, I mean, is a March 21 timescale for the head of DPU to do, I'm not quite sure what. What's the status of that? Lynn?
Sorry, Chair, I wasn't going to come in about the DPU. I was coming in about the overall linkage between the three areas that you mentioned, and obviously the new governance has been put around by the Chief Constable, which is very, very recent. So we will, we will look at that and get more detail as to how that might work. And obviously to bring back some reassurance to the committee. The DPU, I wasn't going to answer that. I don't know whether James would like to pick up on that, or Andrew.
Yeah, or is Tom not on the call? Or would somebody from Police Scotland like to elucidate? James.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to say that's one I'd need to take off table and get an answer for. I don't have the specific level of knowledge. I only have a high level knowledge of it, so I can get an answer for you on that. Although I did see that Alan Spears did have his hands up as well, so he might have something more.
Yeah. Indeed. Alan, welcome. Yes, is this...
Thanks, Chair. Good morning. I was going to touch on it in terms of the Police Scotland report and recognise that there is a number of recommendations that are missed. So there's two recommendations that are very specific around the implementation of the RAM plan, and what we're trying to resolve just now is there some data quality issues, and the confidence that I've been given from the business area, which is Tom, is that those issues can be resolved, and we are still working towards an end of March implementation. At this point, there is a confidence that we can deliver within that timescale.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. That's a good segue, as it were, onto the next item, which is indeed your reporting on that. So, thank you. Well, perhaps note that. Okay, so. Alan, do you want to say any more about that? Although that does answer one of the outstanding questions. Although, it's interesting to reflect on that in light of what the Chief Constable was saying to the board on Friday. I'm not sure he felt as confident in the data issues. Grant.
Chair, could I, before we move off this whole, before we move off this paper, I wondered if I could also pick up something that is almost linking into it's on strategic workforce planning 2.1 key person risk, which is proposed for closure. The risk that internal audit had flagged was making sure that there's cover for key persons or a plan. And I'm not absolutely sure that the reply and response indicates that that has actually been picked up. It refers to it's being developed, but I'm not. I would hate to think that the key issue of being sure that there is cover for key persons has actually, it's not been overlooked in any way. That could cover key persons from a sort of police officer perspective, but also some of the senior other staff in key roles, such as, for example, IT, finance, and all the other ones. I think it's an issue for all organisations to be sure they're not exposed. And I wasn't absolutely convinced from the response that that issue is being picked up somewhere. It's maybe just the wording.
Police Scotland. I don't know, Alan. Which is a bit unfair putting you on the spot, but I mean, it's in as much as strategic workforce plan, I think falls within Fiona Taylor's remit.
Chair, yeah. So at this point, I couldn't give you an update. What I could potentially try and do over the course of the meeting is maybe try and get some clarification back from a couple of my colleagues and feed that in a little bit later, if that'd be helpful.
Equally, Chair, I would be perfectly happy, Alan, if it was kept as sort of to be updated at the next meeting. It's a comment that's proposed for closure that was concerning me, because I think it may still be a live issue that needs to be somehow or other addressed over time.
So would it be appropriate to say we agree it seems appropriate to close it? I mean, there's quite a lot of these. The difficulty is, I think, that the actions, to take the actions in the abstract, just say they are or are not complete, does not, the point Matthew raised earlier, does not really indicate whether or not it's addressed the risk, and indeed, partly because of timing, new risks have arisen. And new considerations have arisen, particularly, I think, when we look at things like strategic workforce plan. But I think that is a reasonable assessment. It's a reasonable position, but from the committee's point of view, there are some areas which still need to be pursued, in particular areas around resource allocation and key person risk, and indeed I would suggest that cyber security, that is one that is outstanding. It's not that I'm uncertain that the cyber security strategy, this is page 19, cybersecurity strategy outlines ICT roles and responsibilities and ICC defence capabilities. I mean, that is true. The question, as the Chief had outlined with the strategic workforce plan, is that is there the resources, and are the resources available to be allocated to that? I think that was a concern that was raised at the board on Friday.
Indeed. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Moving on then to Police Scotland's assessment of where they are in terms of audit and improvement recommendations.
Thanks very much, Chair. Make a couple of comments and just steer you through a couple of highlights from the paper, and then I'll endeavour as best I can to answer any questions. So where we have made some good progress is that the number of recommendations that are on track, that percentage has increased, which is positive, and we have reduced the number of recommendations that have been missed. We've also seen in the last couple of months the implementation of a new action management system, and that's going to be allow us to better assess, probably give you more assurance and a greater level of detail on how we're progressing the recommendations. So that system is just in the final stages of implementation, and our team's getting familiar with that. What I'll say when we come on to some of the recommendations that have been missed, there are a number of interdependencies around them, whether it be ICT or partners, but some of those are indeed more complex than perhaps we first thought. Turning then to page 3 in the report, you'll see some comments around closures. We've closed 62 recommendations in this quarter, and just given the volume of recommendations closed, I've attached Appendix B, just a summary of those recommendations, and set them against sort of four headings: from improvement to service, improvements to partnership, strengthen governance, and improvement to supporting our people, and that's contained within Appendix B. On page 4, the report highlights that we have 144 open recommendations, and we are reporting that a higher percentage of those recommendations are on track than where we were at the previous meeting, and that's highlighted again on page 8 at graph number 4. The full details of the recommendations, as you know, are contained within the Appendix A, which is there. And then in relation to recommendations that are missed, we are reporting 22 recommendations that are missed. That is a reduction of 15 from the previous meetings. I would contest that a number of those recommendations are out with our control, and there's a number of interdependencies around them. Appendix C highlights them and breaks down those recommendations in more detail. In relation to those that were due at the end of December, there are a number that are not complete, but they're equally not entirely missed, and they fall into categories of demand and productivity, which we've talked about in relation to the RAM, cyber resilience, and also non-pay expenditure. So all that detail is broken down in the report, Chair, and I wasn't intent on saying much more at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, you pick up those three are clearly going to be the running themes through this meeting and beyond. I think that's helpful. Any questions, Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Alan, for that comprehensive report, and clearly there's some movement in a whole number of areas. You mentioned there the new action management system. Is that how you refer to it as? Can you say a bit more about that and how that will operate?
So with Chair's indulgence, I would maybe invite Fiona Miller. Fiona has been the advocate probably for about 2 years to bring this system in, and she's probably better equipped to make a couple of comments on that, if that's okay.
Of course. Fiona.
Hi, morning. Yes, so the system that we have brought into place has 2 modules to it, and one side of it is risk management and the other side is audit management, which is what the one you're speaking about. And essentially, it's called 4 Risk and 4 Action. It's provided by a company called RSM, and it's essentially a sort of one-stop shop for anyone within the organisation who's a user on the platform to log on and see all of the actions designated to them and to designate to their business area, and then to go in and update those actions on that system. So instead of managing it through spreadsheets, which we do at the moment, which is quite cumbersome, it kind of allows for one version of the truth and for everything to be updated in one place, if you like. And it's very similar again for risk management, and particularly, I guess, the reporting side of things, which we haven't got up and running yet, but we hope to within the coming year. We'll just, I guess it sort of releases hours back to our teams, if you like, because the reporting that we do at the moment requires a great deal of administrative time and effort to pull together, and these systems have the functionality just to sort of pull it together at a push of a button, if you like. But kind of the one version of the truth side of things is where we'll find a lot of value as well, so that things aren't getting lost between emails or spreadsheets.
That's helpful. Thanks, Chair.
That's very, very interesting, Fiona. I think from this committee's point of view, the quality assurance of that one version of the truth will be of interest. What you say, it's a tried and tested product, but I think it would be interesting for us to be assured about the quality assurance that runs through that. And the second side of it is the reporting. If it means not Excel spreadsheets, which I can't read, I should be simply delighted. And I wonder if it is worth for the reporting to us. You can report as it were how you like, but it might be worth a discussion with John McNellis. I think this probably falls to John, as to how this could be best summarised and reported to the committee for accessibility for the committee, and transparency and visibility in the public domain as well. I think that would be extremely helpful. Can we make that an action from the meeting? John, good morning. I've tasked you. We're tasking you with that, I think.
Thank you. Much appreciated. I would encourage that. Quite happy to take that action. Fiona.
Thank you. Thank you. That's Matt.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and I endorse your comments on the Excel spreadsheet, so that would be very welcome. Something that's a bit easier to read. The other thing I want to touch on, Alan, if I may, is the issue of the closed recommendations, the completed recommendations. Quite a number of those relate to HMICS recommendations and thematic response reports. Now, we've discussed this in the past, but I really want to get some sense of where we fall within the dealing with these matters. You've reported back to us on what is happening in these particular areas. You presumably are also reporting back to HMICS. What's the crossover? It may be not a question for you, Alan. What's the crossover of that discussion of our role here and the HMICS role in dealing with these completed recommendations?
Thanks, Matt. Well, firstly, I think in terms of closing, like any internal recommendation, it can only be closed when there's an agreement from HMICS that they're satisfied that we have discharged that recommendation. I think the role of this committee, we're really keen that any recommendation we get from a independent inspection, review, internal audit or HMICS are well displayed and very transparent. So I would have thought the role of this group would be to ensure that we are delivering against that, and potentially I guess holding us to account on our deliverability of those recommendations. We will at times not always meet the HMICS recommendations and the timescales that are maybe set out. So I think it's a governance role. Would have been my view on that.
Yeah.
That's helpful. I know, Chair, we've been having discussions with HMICS on a whole number of these cross areas, so that perhaps that's something for the future.
I absolutely think so, because what you've highlighted there is closing the loop, is getting assets, do the verification, as it were, of the recommendations and the actions arising out of their recommendations, but you're not, as it's reviewing the HMICS, and we need some sort of closing of the loop there. So I think that's another action to be taken up. Dave, HMICS are observing, but I think, David, we can is appropriate to pick that up after this meeting.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. I would agree that the points made by Alan in terms of the management of the recommendations between Police Scotland and HMICS, and then Police Scotland's responsibility to report on the conclusion of those recommendations into yourselves. But I'm happy to pick that up after the meeting. But
it comes your assurance, as it were, that you are content.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for that, Chair, because I think these are particularly important areas of work that we're dealing with here.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Grant.
Thanks, Chair. And first of all, could I say I also endorse the view of moving away from spreadsheets that are very difficult to read. I struggled with some of the papers that were attached for this meeting, but I wanted to compliment the authors of this paper, because I think that it goes into a lot of helpful detail as to where things are. I mean, for example, on pages 6 and 7, the explanation of recommendations due at the end of December still to be assessed and verified by internal audit. I think it's a very helpful explanation as to where things are, and actually making it very clear where we are on the journey to completion. So I found it a very helpful and informative report. So congratulations to the authors.
Okay. So, thank you. Thank you. So, yes, I think really in the spirit of continuous improvement, I mean, that's very helpful for due the end of December. And I wonder if you could consider, and hopefully this new action management system will enable you to do that in the reporting, is the things which are in flight, and just your assessment of how, what confidence you have that you will be meeting the agreed deadlines I think that would be extremely helpful. Thank you. Good progress. Thank you very much. Unless HMICS, I mean, Dave, it does cover the HMICS recommendations for the first time in narrative detail, which we're able to understand, which I think we've all said is very helpful. Is there anything you would want to comment on in respect to those?
No, nothing to comment on, Chair. I think the relationship managing those with Police Scotland is working well.
Okay. Thank you very much. Lynn, is there anything you would want to comment on?
Nothing to add. Thank you, Chair, to that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and moving on then to D, which is SBA audit and improvement recommendations. Okay, and this is John, is it? John.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I would briefly summarise this paper as almost two parts. The first part looks at the SPA's business plan and progress that's been made, and that's summarised in paragraph 2.2, where I would say progress is very, very good. We're estimating that we'll be 97% of our actions achieved by the end of this financial year, with one minor point outstanding, and that's really been delayed because of COVID and some other challenges with the SPA structure. I would note that actually only just this week we're doing the planning at the minute for the SPA's business plan for next financial year, so you'll be interested to see that in due course. The next part on paragraph 2.4 is a summary table that tries to bring together all the different SPA audit and inspection recommendations. And we do have in the next item a bit more of a deep dive on the HMICS thematic inspection. What I would really just say here, without getting into any detail, progress has been made. As part of joining SPA, I'm going to take a fresh look at how SPA collates, monitors and reports on some of these recommendations. So I was really interested and happy with the point you just made about some of the reporting, which is one of the things I was going to talk about. That I want to take forward, both internally, how SPA monitors our own recommendations in that kind of dashboard format, and then what we pass up to yourselves on ARAC. That's all I would say on this paper.
Thank you. That said, this is certainly a much clearer presentation than we've had than hitherto, and I welcome that. And it's not to say I'm sure that there won't be dramatic changes and improvements, but this is certainly much easier to understand and clearer than some of what we've had. And as you say, good progress, except perhaps in the Information Commissioner's Office recommendations, and those ones do really stand out as something which needs to be a priority, which I think, Lynn, I see you nodding your head, and I think it is appropriate to refer to you at this point.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. And that was one of the reasons, one of the things we looked at in our structure. I would say the staff been involved have not had the enough support to deliver on some of these, and sheer volumes of staff for a start. So we are addressing that. And we intend to take it forward, and we're going to we will make good progress on that. I'm confident that we will do that, but it has really been that we weren't resourced up to do that, and we are now. So thank you.
So that we will have made progress on this question mark by the time of the next committee meeting in May. Do you expect to see?
We will make progress, yes, in terms of taking forward some of the recommendations. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Grant?
Thanks, Chair. And I was also going to home in on the fact that the ICO outstanding ones are probably the ones of perhaps most concern. I totally agree with Lynn's comments about the fact that there hasn't been enough focus on having the team in place to implement these. But I wonder if we've got any clues as to how close we are to a follow-up review by the ICO. They do tend to, as I understand it, follow things up from time to time, and it would be unfortunate if they arrived just at the wrong moment, as it were. I don't know if we've got any information about when they're likely to come, or whether they're simply requesting written submissions, but it would be helpful to bear that in mind. Having said that, I think John's report here is the clearest layout of where we are that we've seen for a while, so well done.
Okay, Lindsay, yeah. Do you you've joined us for this item, and that's
yeah. So
yeah.
to answer Grant's question, we've just done a written. We've just submitted our written update to the Information Commissioner. We just sent that in last week. They asked for an update in December, and that has been completed. So we haven't had any feedback from them yet, but we had to send additional evidence. They only asked for evidence for the urgents and the highs. So they take it face value mostly, but they did actually, although they only asked for evidence for the urgents and highs, they then came back and asked for evidence for some of the mediums as well. So we did a lot of work in December to send evidence to them for the actions we'd closed off, and also those that we'd marked as partially complete. And just in the last month, we've made a lot of progress with new staff in PSOS in getting those actions closed off that are dependent on them.
Good.
Thank you. And that's encouraging. Nevertheless, I don't think we should just leave this open-ended. And I think I would welcome an update report. I mean, you will be managing this through our own internal risk management, and therefore I would expect this to escalate if there were anything serious coming out of this. But I think it would be appropriate to bring a short follow-up report to the May meeting on this, in the same way as we're getting follow-up reports on specifically the HMICS. I think I'd like to see a follow-up either incorporated in the main body of the report or separately on this for May. I'm not saying it will all be complete by, but I think I'd like to see progress and then some specific deadlines, if that could be considered as part of the thinking. Then, appropriate?
Sorry, couldn't really hear very well there, Chair. Yes, absolutely. We will bring back. Obviously, we report anyway on all the recommendations at every meeting, but we'll focus on this and bring something back. Yes.
I think. Gillian Woolman, Audit Scotland.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say we welcome Appendix C that has been compiled and reported today. Just picking up on the earlier conversation about closing the loop, just to remind members of ARAC that external audit will be following through on the recommendations we've made, and we'll be reporting back on the completeness or not of those recommendations, either through our interim or our final reporting. So we will be closing the loop. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. Anything else then on this paper before we move on to the very specifically HMICS recommendations? No?
Just a comment here. It's always gratifying to get a paper where it's indicated that there's 97% of the work that's been achieved. So I congratulate John on that.
Yeah, we do of course aim for 100%, but you're absolutely right. Absolutely. Paper E, which is the very specifically HMICS thematic inspection of SPA progress. Lynn, are you going to talk to this?
Yes, Chair, I'm going to talk to this, and we've deliberately pulled this out as a separate report really for a couple of reasons. The first one is that we have had really productive conversations with HMICS, and particularly Tina Ewell, in terms of how we report to ARAC on this. And we were very keen to set out at 2.2 in the report to sort of categorise the recommendations. in a more meaningful way, so ARAC can really track and hold us to account, as can the HMICS. So we've now pulled it out into 4 categories. The recommendations that we can address, they're in our gift. And the second one is where we need a contribution from out with the SPA, with other partners, where recommendations are owned by the Scottish Government and not by ourselves. And finally, where we've discharged recommendations. So you will see that the report looks different. Again, that's down to the work from John McNellis with Graham Stickle in conversation and with HMICS, and hopefully it's more helpful to you. So in the summary, if we just go to the table in the summary at Appendix A, you'll see quite quickly that of the 14 recommendations, 6 we are addressing, 4 are out with our own gift. We work with other partners, but we give an update on all of these. There's 1 owned by the Scottish Government, and we have discharged 3 of the recommendations, and that has been signed off by HMICS. So again, the report looks different. We set out in much more detail those 4 areas. We say the actions have been completed, what the planned action is, documentation provided to HMICS in support of that, and a summary position of each of the recommendations. So this is new. It's looking at it differently. I think it's more helpful. I think it assists ARAC in holding us to account in a much more clearly. And we'll take any questions on it, and I'm particularly interested in whether you find this helpful as a format. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Grant, comment or questions from you?
Sorry, apologies. And apologies for my phone ringing, and that's why I put it on mute. I'd just like to congratulate Lynn and John for the way they've actually changed the format here. I think it's very easy to follow, very clear, and does indeed allow us to home in on who is actually moving things forward. I think that's extremely helpful. The only thing that is perhaps uncertain as to exactly, in some cases, exactly the expected closure date, but I appreciate that that's probably still work in progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Grant. Yes, it is. We were keen to, and I have to say, Graham Stickle's been heavily involved in this as well, with John. Yes, we're keen to do it different. We need to try and get actual deadlines when we want to deliver in these. That's why we wanted to categorise them. There's those that we are addressing, we need to really take them forward and close them off. The others may not be in our gift, but we need to work closely with other partners and also with the Scottish Government as well in terms of their recommendations. So that's why we're doing it slightly differently, so we can hone in on things and get deadlines.
Okay, thank you. Matt, any comments from you?
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Lynn, for the report, which is very helpful. I think, too, it not only lays out where we are in these issues, but deals with some of what I might have felt as shifting sands. For example, the establishment of the round table, which clearly has an impact on many of these issues. That's picked up in the report, and it's very helpful to have that detail. So no questions, and just acknowledge that it's a good report.
Yeah. Gillian Woolman, thank you.
Chair, I was just wondering if it was okay for me to ask, just to enhance my understanding. So the likes of recommendation 2, where the responsibility lies with the Scottish Government, I was just wondering whether through the discussions between the Interim Chief Executive and HMICS, what the reporting line will be, or the line of communication back to SPA ARAC that has been concluded. Will HMICS be monitoring that and then bring the information back to you? Just wondering how that might work ultimately.
Chair, in terms of a recommendation like that, we have constant dialogue with our colleagues in the Scottish Government on a one-to-one basis and more formal as well. So I would expect that ARAC are completely up to date in where we are in this. HMICS will obviously track it in their own way through their own monitoring systems, but I will report on this where we are, as I have this dialogue with the Scottish Government, and I will be sharing this report with them as well.
But I suppose that just highlights or that there will be some HMICS, or indeed maybe in other areas, but particularly for these, where they will inevitably, because they are not within our control, they will remain open, and that is, as you say, not within our control, and somehow it's just a recognition of that, so that actually that the recommendation has not been closed off by HMIS is not necessarily a failure from SPA or indeed any of the other parties. It's, as somebody referred to earlier, Alan, I think the complex interdependencies that they are, but I think understanding that landscape. I thought that particularly actually in relation to recommendation 12, the Scottish Police Authority and Police Scotland should develop a forward planning system of proactive risk awareness and post-implementation scrutiny. That actually seems to me one of the more complex areas, and I'm not sure that that's actually entirely being addressed. And actually, having said that, I think that's something which is deemed to be within our control. Is that entirely within our control?
Well, yes, I think it's a sort of joint action with Police Scotland. So I think it's absolutely within our remit to work with Police Scotland on that. Can I just say, an answer to just particularly some points have been raised. This report is to bring clarity of accountability. So ARAC can hold media account to delivering these, and HMICS are supportive of this analysis of these recommendations, and then they can hold others to account as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, I think we're unanimous in that it provides exactly the clarity that enables accountability, and I think it's commendable. We all appreciate the work that's gone into this. We're pleased to track it in this way. Okay. Thank you very much. So if we move on now to we have 4 new internal audit reports to be addressed. We've allowed an hour in terms of the indicative timings. Of course, I won't preclude any discussion, but it seemed likely, shall we say, that the first of them, benefits realisation and efficiency, was going to take the most time, but let us see. So Gary, I think this is one that you indicated you were going to lead on. So
yep.
Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And this has been a really complex area for internal audit to review, and it was fast moving when we were reviewing it. One of the things in introducing the report is to recognise that many of the issues we were raising with Scotland and the team were already known by Police Scotland and the team at the point that we were raising them. So we were working also with, we issued the initial report in July, and then we worked with Police Scotland to reissue the report. So you'll see that the report gives you an update on the work that Police Scotland were already doing to address some of the issues that we were raising through the report, and we very much welcomed that engagement with Police Scotland. We think that was very helpful in enabling us to conclude the report. So what's the report telling you? Well, it's saying that Police Scotland have really good arrangements for articulating planning and forecasting benefits, but those arrangements don't always translate to how they report achieving the benefits. So there is a gap between the forecast and the delivery, and the ability to evidence that the efficiency savings that were planned and the success criteria set out at the outset of the projects were being achieved. And that goes to the nub of everything else which is in this report. If you go to the control assessment section, which is on the second page, there were 5 controls that we were looking at. You can see one of them is marked as red. This is where we felt there was most work to do to develop a system for evidencing where benefits were once benefits had been identified, where those benefits were being reinvested, and the ability to provide assurance back to the SPA board and to the Police Scotland management team that they had in fact been achieved. The key findings set that out in more detail. So they set out the good practice areas, so defined and documented an approved benefits management strategy in place, a PMO office which was delivering monthly reports in quite some detail. Value of money considerations were being outlined in business cases, a clear strategy on benefit management, and a clear programme of planned cashable savings. And then in detail, the areas for improvement, a robust means to establish and measure the realisation, particularly of FTE benefits. So this is where you are saving on employee time, and but employee numbers don't decline; they stay the same. So how do you evidence the efficiency gain by moving employees? And they could be reassigned to other tasks, and you could be reducing backlogs, and that should translate into greater performance efficiency. And you need a mechanism for tracking that through the organisation. We thought the Police Scotland could do better in setting success criteria at the outset, and measurement criteria for that success. And then we felt that more needed to be done in implementing a governance structure, particularly in allocating responsibility for delivering the savings that had been identified at the outset, and then reporting those much more clearly. We had a number of really good meetings with the Police Scotland team. You can see that we have quite complex, detailed management recommendations, and I felt a really good response from the Police Scotland team on how they were going to take forward the implementation of management actions. I'm going to assume that members have read the report. It is detailed and complex, and happy to take any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. I absolutely recognise the timescale over which this has operated, and the complexity of a landscape, which indeed this was an aspect which was touched on very much at the board meeting last Friday, the whole issue around evidence, whether of benefits realisation or of demand, and the what impact that has on resource allocation. So
I should have said when I was introducing this that there is a lot of investment here, so it's really important, isn't it? This is attracting significant investment from Scottish Government and from the SPA board, and it really is important that the SPA board are able to evidence the impact that investment is having. So what this report is trying to do is support structure that enables the SPA board to be confident that that investment is delivering the impact that you had set off at the outset that you were planning to achieve.
Which is one key element, but having realised the benefits, and which is why I think the idea of bringing everything together in a design, demand and resource allocation board, because the critical thing is how are the benefits then being used, which is something that we've touched on a lot. Okay, thank you. Yes, complexity of the report. Grant.
Thanks, Chair. And Gary, thank you very much for this report and for your summary, which I think sums it up extremely well. As Jane has mentioned, it was discussed at the board on Friday, and it's certainly an area that's not new to us. It's just a matter of being absolutely clear that somebody is actually being able to demonstrate how the results of all the considerable investment in people, systems, and all the other things that we're doing in terms of equipment are actually producing a better service to the people of Scotland. Whether that's in terms of eating into the backlog and getting things done more quickly, or actually exploring new areas that are cropping up, such as cyber, for example, where we are clearly having to address the fact that crime is changing. There are also plenty of other demands on police officers, particularly in relation to the amount of time they spend on areas such as people with mental health issues. So actually tracking how people are spending their time is key. You and I are probably very familiar with accountants having to fill in timesheets as to how time is spent. So you can actually do a bit of analysis and you can actually track things in different ways. That's not really appropriate for police officers, but I think actually finding out how people spend their time and where the benefits of providing better equipment, better systems, better information, avoiding duplication and so on, and freeing people up is so important to everybody that the faster we can get on and implement what the recommendations in this report, particularly the one area that you flagged as red, I think is key to this, and we should all welcome progress in this area.
Grant, I totally agree with that. It might be worth hearing from Andrew Hendry, who was leading on the Police Scotland's response. I should say that actually Police Scotland does better than many organisations in this area. But it's a really complex area. It's a large and complex organisation, and tracking these benefits is inherently difficult. There aren't very many organisations in either the private or public sectors that are able to do it perfectly. In fact, I don't think there is a perfect way of doing it. But I would say that the Police Scotland response, I think, is quite a comprehensive response. It should get us to, or get, the SPA to a place where it feels comfortable with the level of assurances that it's received.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. It'd be very helpful to hear from Andrew. I'm trying to set, when we come to the governance, I have a question about that, because that which is proposed in terms of governance, I think, is very usefully drawing together all of the issues. It's predicated on good data, essentially. Either the design or if you have a strategic workforce plan which is demand-led, predicated on good data about demand, both current and predicted. It's not really a data issue as yet. And then the resource allocation. So that if we home in on this, on the data, as it were, the benefits realisation, Andrew, that would be very helpful. Andrew, any comments from you?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think, firstly to say, I think this exercise was really worthwhile. I think, the team, really enjoyed the challenge and the engagement from Gary and the team, and it was really appreciated the collaborative approach. So, just to put that down formally, I think we all enjoyed the journey as much as you can enjoy an audit. I think, if we look at the actual report, I mean, there's nothing there that we would disagree with. I think, taking into totality, the actual journey that Police Scotland's been on from a change and transformation perspective, not only putting in the professional capability, but managing the ability to deliver the change that Police Scotland's delivered in the last few years. I think, we really are at the kind of end of that journey in regards to really now dealing with the more mature and probably more complex aspects that you're not able to actually deal with until you're actually up and running to a certain extent. From a benefits perspective, as Gary referenced, a lot of the things that were raised in the report were certainly on our radar, but we did benefit from a bit of challenge and discussion on them. Simply put, it comes down to a demand and supply, conversation eventually. Benefits are essentially a currency in the organisation that, demonstrate success, but are then, looked to be reinvested and can be utilised in whatever way possible. Unfortunately, sat behind that is a very complex engine that, goes from, pure benefit around actual, capacity creation through to productivity. And again, when you're looking at the size of organisation we are, complexity of the organisation, the data that sits behind that, you have to do it in a scalable, organisational wide way, but equally account for the nuances that is policing. be it in terms of specific roles or specific, examples. So I think really, hopefully, members note from the report that a lot of that is being gripped, and really, I think the kind of, the kind of report in the totality did highlight both the progress made and also the direction of travel and the focus. But to go back to your point, Chair, about the actual data, again, working really closely with other parts of the organisation that either inform or make use of the benefits piece is key to our approach going forward. The DDRB, again, that met for the first time yesterday, and that really did start to look at benefit realisation and usage in these terms. Again, one of the main challenges we'll have in the setup of that going forward is maturing all the components together to make sure that all the needles are kind of, or all the dials are facing in the right direction to allow the kind of benefit output to be circular and actually allow us to kind of track that back through the process. So again, all that's in train. I suppose what I would say is that from an organisation perspective, we're comfortable that we are moving in the right direction at the right pace. As I said, the benefit of this report, does allow us to sharpen our pencil a bit around the key components. We do have, wider engagement and change across the organisation and internally and externally. Just to reference, we do have the second bi-monthly engagement and change session with SPA members planned for middle of February. And again, there'll be a lot of progress demonstrated there, and also direction of travel, and also a bit of a kind of deeper dive into the kind of DDRB construct and how all that links into the wider processes. So I'm happy to take any questions, but I'd be comfortable leaving it there, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very good analysis. I like that demand and supply, and demand we've talked about at the board, and that's separate to this, but is certainly an ongoing issue. Benefits as a currency, I think, is particularly appropriate phrase. Just picking up on that last, because it does seem to me that one of the things that the SPA, in its totality, but at board level as well as ARAC level, just an understanding of the architecture and where the DDR, is it the demand design requirements allocation, fits in, how it fits with the corporate finance and people board, one of the things that I think would be the most useful, one of the most useful follow-ups actions from this meeting would be just an architecture plan, as it were, about the internal governance that is now in operation as if the DDR is met already. So with to explain not just what its terms of reference are, but what the reporting lines are, I think that would be enormously helpful. And if you can do that, I mean, it's possible to do that by the end of February, because it sounds as though you've actually got it, you know where it sits already, if it's met already. I mean, in other words, we shouldn't have to wait until May.
No, thanks, Chair. I mean, just to give you confidence, that's something that was planned to be surfaced at the 6-monthly engagement session with the SPA in the middle of February. So by the end of February, that will be matured past that point as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm getting a feedback on my feedback loop. I don't know where that's coming from, and if it's from me or from others. Can I just encourage people to keep themselves on mute unless they're speaking? But thank you very much. Grant.
Thanks, Chair. Could I just follow up what you've just been saying in relation to the DDR? Because the first I'd heard about it was actually really at the board on Friday, and I think it would be very useful to get the understanding of how it's all going to, how the jigsaw, the moving parts are all going to fit together very soon. But what I just wanted to clarify from Andrew was, is the expectation that all the information that is being gathered and analysed, is it going to be broken down into the various divisions in a way that the DDR can look at the component parts, the different requirements in different divisions around Scotland, as opposed to looking at it in its totality. Because an awful lot of the things that we've seen in the past have been very much at the macro, the aggregate position, but to actually really being able to drill down into the different areas and different activities is clearly going to be helpful in seeing exactly what's happening.
Thanks, Grant. Yeah, certainly. We've got different views of the data that we use. Now, sometimes there is an issue with the way that the particular change programme or activity is designed, whereby it's rolled out and then the benefits can be analysed after it's been rolled out in regards to divisional split, because sometimes operational priority dictates that split. So it's either after the fact or before, but certainly in a totality, divisional view is what we're currently working through.
Thank you.
Yeah, a totality. I think, can I just understand this correctly? Grant's question was whether it's going to be addressed on a divisional level. I think what you've just said is totality, and indeed the management response is that the DDR will provide a national oversight and strategic decision-making forum. Yes, I think your risk is that it is at such a strategic view that the benefits are not necessarily invested at a local level, but that is a risk which I'm sure you'll pick up in your risk register and the operation. Thank you. Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I did want to raise it a little bit. I mean, it was really helpful to have that operational discussion about Andrew's plans to operationalise the review into a structure and architecture that's going to provide an output. I just wanted to think about that at board member level and what you're, amongst many things, many of the challenges you have, and they are complex and interconnected, is the issue that Audit Scotland have raised previously and a number of others around the budget position and future financial sustainability, and part of that is it will come from the Scottish Government. But you do need a line of sight into how the business is going to become more efficient and effective to deliver any savings in spend. Some of those are really difficult because you have the number of police officer limits and so on, and it is complex. But I think you should be able to be, at a strategic level, you should be looking to be able to respond to stakeholders about what you're achieving from the investment and give confidence outwardly. I know that you know that, but it's whether that operationalised structure is going to enable the board to say you're going at the right pace, or you need to go faster, or we think the level of resources that are being put into this are at the correct level, or too much or too little. It's those kind of strategic questions rather than the operationalised nature, which Andrew will need.
Completely understand that, and indeed, funnily enough, that almost anticipates. I had a question here about whether the action owner was David Page and Andrew, whether it's the Chief Constable, in the sense of he's chairing the board, and whether, if that be so, and to some extent we touched on that at the board on Friday, whether the board is the right forum for that, or whether jointly between ARAC and Resource Committee is the right forum for that, or just finding the right forum at the right pitch. I think that's a very good and very helpful observation. Thank you, and I think that's something that SPA need to reflect on. But I suppose I just wonder, given that the management action really references the DDR, as do a number of the other management actions, but those are about data, whether, and given the importance, grade 4, whether this is one where, at the very least, an annual report, something like that, or do we need a 6-month progress report from the Chief Constable? I think is something we should be thinking on. Committee members or Lynn, a view, or Gillian, indeed, a view on that?
Chair, can I come in? I think Andrew has indicated that there will be a separate detailed session around all of this with the board around change, and so maybe after that you could take a view on the best governance on this. We do have already agreed a 6-monthly report that goes to the board on the whole issue of change, and this will be part of that. If you want to drive down deeper, maybe after you've had that workshop, you can take a view after that.
Sorry, through you, Chair, is this a session in February you're suggesting, Lynn, that would be the springboard for that?
I think it is, Andrew, am I right? It's a session, yeah, thank you.
And just, Andrew, it's worth highlighting then that that's one of the themes, one of the questions to be explored, ideally addressed at that session, but that's one of the open questions, I think. Yes, okay, thank you. Gillian, any reflections from you?
Reflections are, sorry, I'm putting off a heater here. It's a very small cold study. So reflections are, we'll want to absorb all of this. I'm also conscious of the strategic workforce plan that came to the board on Friday, and I'm also conscious that you are seeking to see your performance management framework fully embedded and effective, and I do think they're all very interrelated, in particular looking at the financial savings that are intended from some of the strategies to do with local policing in future years. So I do think there's a lot of interrelationships here, but ultimately you do have a performance management framework and expectations with respect to reporting there. So I'd expect this all to fit into that framework in due course. We look forward to monitoring it and learning more about it.
Okay. Good. Well, I mean, without going through it line by line, I think if management have accepted the recommendations, I think is very helpful. The dates are set, I think all of the dates are within this year.
Yes.
Which I'm pleased to see that it's not running over at this point in the intention into next year. Noting that there is this engagement with the board in February, which will explore some of the interrelationships, and that I think an outcome from that should be that by the end of February, to this committee, but I think of general interest is the architecture for the governance, how this will work. And I think at that board in February, so by the time we come to the next ARAC in May, we should, I hope, have some agreed plan for how the progress reporting of this is addressed, which is likely to be not just this committee, shall we say. Let's be content with that as a summary of the position. Okay, thank you. Very good and interesting piece of work there, and look forward to seeing that deliver the benefits. Indeed, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on then to the other 3 audit reports that we have, which I want to preempt, but may not take as long. And the first of these is the COVID-19 report and management response to COVID-19.
Matt Swan is taking you through these reports, so it's over to Matt.
Thank you, Chair. I think your billing of this that the other 3 may not take as long due to the issues and level that have been put in the report is probably a reasonable one, but I never say never on these things because sometimes a little bit of debate can be opened up. In some respects, the COVID-19 report has some of the similar characteristics to what Gary outlined within the benefits realisation. This was very much a fast-moving area whilst we were looking at this, and we engaged with management throughout this to present as rounded and as up-to-date position as possible at the conclusion for you at this committee, and to give as much in the way of a fair summary of that position. The overall point that I want to draw your attention to is that overall there's been an effective response by management in relation to the initial response to COVID-19, as is highlighted through the majority of the report. There's a real need for management to have acted quickly in balancing the operational need, updating guidance in an area where things were changing almost on a daily basis at times, and we've tried to reflect that as clearly as we possibly can in the report, particularly around guidance which was updated in relation to working from home and procurement to address live changes to the environment that exists at the time. We've highlighted 3 grade 2 findings in relation to clarity of HR guidance, whether that is a permanent change or to term, and how that gets effectively communicated, the tracking of COVID-19 response actions, and indeed the follow-up with critical suppliers, and whether that has been appropriately recorded. There isn't anything other than that I particularly want to draw to the committee's attention, and I think the report largely speaks for itself in these, but indeed would very much welcome either comments from management or indeed questions from the committee in relation to the content of the report.
Thank you very much. Matt, anything from you?
Thanks, Sharon, and thanks for the report. You used the term as fast moving, and it just struck me that looking at this report, it does look at a moment in time. Things change very quickly with the whole COVID situation, and I really was wondering about the relevance of the recommendations for the future. I think in all cases they are relevant, but I think they will probably have to be revisited from time to time given that change. What I'd like to hear though is Police Scotland's more detailed response. I know we've got it in the report, and then perhaps come back after that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, to the extent of Police Scotland, who's leading on this, and whose area is it? James, is it you? Because it is the important thing. I think it should be noted. The audit doesn't cover operational policing or the IAG, which is, I think, one of the major responses to COVID. Certainly in terms of operational matters and in terms of SPA oversight, and it doesn't cover forensic services, obviously. But James, insofar as what it does cover, would you like to?
Thanks, Chair. We were content with the report, and I think it's a fair reflection on how we dealt with the situation. I think the point that Matt makes is right, that it's probably a one-off type thing, but there is learning in there, and we have been able to apply it. So, for example, in the area of procurement, it was good to see that where we got the comment around writing out to key suppliers and making sure we follow that up and how we determine that. Well, we were actually able to use that when it came to writing to key suppliers with regards to the arrangements they put in place for the UK's departure from the European Union. So there's some learning that we've been able to practically apply there to our benefit. But I was content with the findings in the report, and there was nothing there that caused me any great concern. I mean, happy to try and answer any specific questions on it, but overall, I think that the feeling from us was that we were quite content.
Okay, Gary, before I ask Grant.
I just want, just in case it's missed, the overarching finding from the report is the Police Scotland did a really good job in a really complex situation and responded quickly and effectively to COVID-19 and really did it very well. And I think coming out of such a complex response to have 3 minor internal audit actions, I think is a real testament to the management attention and action in that sphere. It could have been much more risky, and looking back with the benefit of 50-50 hindsight, which of course is what internal audit does, tells you that they did that whole process really very effectively. So I just thought I would say that, just in case it's missed.
I agree with that, Chair. I think we should acknowledge that, because it is, although I use the phrase a moment in time, it's a very significant moment in time. To have a report of this nature about what happened during that period is of some importance.
It's also why I bring out it didn't cover operational, and the responses to that, which I think have been addressed and examined and scrutinised at board level in very considerable detail. And again, I think I've, broadly speaking, offer the same assessment. So I think
yes.
That's been good. Okay, Grant, anything to add?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, basically, I'm not wanting to repeat what's just been said. I think it's been it's been a moving target. And I think one of the key things that in relation to things like HR policies, when they were put in place, people were thinking that this would be a very short, perhaps a short-term situation, which now sort of looking as if it's got a much longer tail to it. And what might have worked for a short period does need to be regularly refreshed as to how is it coping with things changing a longer term. People working from home, for example, may have had a very instant response to how they could deal with something very short term, but if they're actually having to work from home for a much longer period, different criteria and different considerations need to be borne in mind. So I welcome the report. I think it's extremely helpful, very reassuring, and I don't underestimate the fact that there's got to be a sort of live issue that needs to be periodically updated, taking into account the fact that it looks as if we're going to be dealing with this for a longer period.
Good, thank you very much. And Gillian, I don't know if you want to comment on. I think this. I know that Audit Scotland in the round. The impact of COVID is clearly going to be one of the themes for all audit of this year, I anticipate.
Thanks, Chair, for the opportunity to comment. Yes, we welcome the fact that in a very flexible and timely fashion, the decision was used to get the independent view of internal audit and to commission such work from internal audit, so you would get some real-time assurances about the response. And in particular, had the findings been something different, it would have, be an opportunity for a responsive action. So it's very good news that it's taken place and the results thereon. I think, Chair, I just wanted to raise one other point, though. This particular report struck me once again about the nature of the cover papers on the internal audit reports that come to committee. You'll know in our annual audit report last year we made a light reference with respect to agendas and papers, and I also know back in February 2020 there was an internal review just ensuring that everything is as good as it can be with respect to reporting, with respect to equalities and so on. All of your cover papers have a standard section for a whole host of areas, including equalities implications. And I note that the cover paper would appear to be drafted by internal audit, and it's also saying for committee members to consider any implications. And there's also equalities, environment, reputation, etc. And I do wonder whether a report such as this is a moment in time to think, internal audit have fulfilled their responsibility in the compilation and submission of the report back to the organisation that commissioned it. And now it's over to the organisation to own the cover paper. And indeed, there were equalities implications from all of these rapid decisions having to be made. Yeah. If you think of the protected characteristics of all of your officers and staff. And I know there are assurances in the body of the report about everything that was done from a human resources perspective, but the time might be right now for the organisation to be receiving the report and take ownership of the cover paper and the view that all equalities implications were indeed satisfactorily covered or not. So I know I'm taking you down a different route there, but now that John McNellis is in post, and so it's maybe an opportunity to think about it. But I'm sorry, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but it was quite provocative in that regard. But certainly a report we welcome. And yes, you're right, Chair. Audit Scotland is very interested in everything of this nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn.
Thank you, Chair. Gillian has raised that issue with me previously, and I think this is a good example of what it means in practice. So I'm very happy to have further discussions with external audit and with colleagues to see how we can improve our covering reports.
Thank you. Thank you. Both, that's a good point raised and a good response, and look forward to that. So, I mean, another of the themes of this meeting is that reporting, what we're seeing is definitely improved, and there's more that can be done to make things even clearer, and both lines of sight and lines of accountability even clearer, and that's very helpful. Okay, thank you. It's fine. And then moving on to the third which is core financial systems. This is part of a regular, part of the regular cycle. Gary or Matthew?
It's me for the kind of the remaining two substantive papers with Gary to talk to the audit plan when we get to that point. In some respects, this is a similar kind of main theme as to the previous report in terms of the importance of the recommendations we're raising, with all of the points raised in relation to this being grade 2, with a few more included than in the previous report. Overall, though, it is providing good assurance that the overall fixed asset process is robust, well controlled within Police Scotland, and indeed the points that we've raised are primarily in relation to either lower risk, lower value areas within the system, or indeed areas where it's an enhancement to already existing processes and making sure that they are carried out appropriately. For example, in terms of the asset verification exercises and ensuring that covers the full breadth of categories. There is, due to the kind of points that we're talking about being grade 2 in nature, I'll take it as read that the committee have read the paper in full and indeed have any kind of questions well prepared. But again, as ever, would welcome comments in particular from members of the management team, most likely James, I suspect, and indeed then any questions from committee members.
Okay, James, do you want to offer, and perhaps particularly, let me give you a question somewhere and just get this right. The one that leapt out for me, I suppose, minors is nevertheless, disposal process, page 9. We've obtained evidence of disposal process in relation to land, buildings, vehicle, ICT, and some specific type. I beg your pardon, I've misread that. I was thinking it didn't cover weaponry, but it does cover weaponry. Is that correct? Because that seemed fairly significant. So it does cover weaponry.
Yeah.
Good.
I mean, I think overall, again, I kind of satisfied with the report. It's highlighted things that will be helpful to tighten up controls, but obviously this is an area in fixed assets, if you went back a number of years, that caused significant difficulties for the organisation. So it's good to see that having this internal audit report it kind of reflects the progress that I thought we had made. Obviously, you know, we're not complacent. These things need to be maintained as we go. It's very easy to, you know, for things to fall back. So, you know, we'll keep pushing and improving where we can. But yeah, so the recommendations that have been raised, we're content with, and it will help strengthen controls. There was nothing there that caused me any great concern. I mean, the one around disposals, around not having single, you know, standardized processes and you know how we do that, we can look at that again. I mean, there will be probably some differences, but I suppose it's around documenting that and making a conscious choice to do it rather than it just appears it's happening haphazardly. So the disposal of weapons is very different to the disposal of buildings, for example. But you know, like I say, we've accepted all the recommendations and hopefully the management responses are adequate from the perspective of the committee. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Matt, anything to raise on this?
No, Chair, thanks for the report and thanks for the management comments. I noticed all of it will be done by the 31st of March, so I think from that we should take some comfort.
Yeah. Grant?
Thanks, Chair. Reading the report didn't bring any surprises. I think it demonstrates a lot of work has been done by James and team to actually plug some of the inconsistencies that have been in place for quite a while. I did notice, however, on page 4, there's reference to the lack of clarity in relation to the responsibility for some legacy assets is still an issue. I wondered if anybody had anything in particular in mind with that, because as James has mentioned, the control over weaponry and built land and buildings is quite different, but this is perhaps something in between, and I wondered if someone could give me an indication of what people had in mind in this description.
Can anybody? James?
So maybe I'll start. I mean, I think this is a legacy issue that what we find, and I'm sure Gillian might remember this from her previous experience as the appointed auditor, was that some of the record keeping from legacy forces, and particularly around the time when it was known that Police Scotland was going to be established, a lot of the focus moved away from the kind of day-to-day and onto setting up the arrangements for the introduction of Police Scotland. And certain assets where potentially, that there was a capital contribution from a legacy police force and into part of the building, there were question marks about whether those buildings were, whether there was any kind of asset there, or whether, in the sense that should Police Scotland be recognising an asset or not. Now, a lot of work has been done across finance and legal and the estates team to establish this, and I think we've got to a reasonable position, but that there are likely, to always be a little bits of grey area, but not to the extent that I think it causes us any great concern now. Whereas that's probably not something that we could have said going back three or 4 years. And I don't know, Alistair, from his perspective, whether he might have something to say on this as well, being the person that kind of has the direct oversight of this.
Oh, thank you, James. I mean, I don't think anything much to add to what you've just said. I think it does go back to the legacy issue. So it's that variability of practices across the legacy forces, I think, here, and some lack of visibility over some of the specific those lower value assets, really. So it's not the land and buildings and things like that. It's really just some of the I think it's the PPE and the fixtures and fittings, just some areas like that. But it is an area that we're going to look at, and we are going to try and pick that up, and we will certainly pick that up through an intensified process around physical verifications, but also tightening up the policy and procedures as well on that. So I think James said in his previous comments, we're not complacent about any of this. I mean, we're assured by the report, but it does highlight some areas of housekeeping and controls that do need to be tightened up, because if we let it slip, it does quickly fall into a problem area. So we are keen to close the circle on that.
Thank you. It was the reference to potential reputational risk from that really made me home in on it. It's perhaps not knowing what's not known or written down that is the tricky area in this.
Yeah, good point. So I think we will focus on that and find out. We'll do a bit more digging to find out if there's anything of particular risk, bearing in mind the unknown unknowns aspect that you point out, which is obviously a challenge.
But that is in terms of legacy. In terms of current acquisitions, you should be starting. You should be following best practice from the outset. And I'm thinking of current acquisitions as being in terms of the significant investment, for example, in PPE and things like that. So that should not create a legacy issue, create an issue, legacy or otherwise. Yeah.
That's exactly right, Chair. I'm just going to say the way I viewed this was there was two pieces of work to do if you went back to 2017. One was we had to clear the issues from the past, which was because obviously the balances roll forward year on year, so you need to fix it. And there was a massive piece of work in 2017 where we had to bring in some additional support to really clean the position up, and that helped us have the modified opinion removed that year. And then obviously you then need your practices going forward to be robust, so that you're not starting to create issues going forward. So I think we have addressed both of those things. But with regards to the legacy stuff, as has come out in this report, there's always bits and pieces of things that we continue to tighten up. But like I say, compared to where we were in 2017 and the scale of what that risk might have been from a kind of audit perspective as well into the opinion, I think that's greatly diminished and has been reflected in the audit opinions that we've had over the past 3 years.
Okay, thank you very much. Gillian, would it be unfair to put you on the spot, because that actually is, as James says, the previous significant difficulties of which you are personally aware from your previous appointment, but in your current appointment, are you content with this?
So just to say, we welcome this internal audit report. It's going to be a very important aspect to pay attention to the content, the findings and the conclusion as part of the 2021 audit of the financial statements. And the report is also important with respect to the journey that SPA Police Scotland has been on. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. So that's very satisfactory, and indeed at pace, because your completion dates are all within the next quarter, I think. That's fine. And finally, then, audit report D on forensic case management. Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Again, we have a report for you which provides overall reasonably good assurance over well-designed controls in the particular area of forensics which we have looked at during the course of this audit. There's a few small risk areas, 3 of which relate to grade 2 points in relation to the completion of data security audits as required by the SOP, record keeping of meetings of management groups, in particular around ensuring that appropriate actions are noted to allow them to be tracked through to completion. And then finally, in terms of agreeing further clarity of the various points within the Memorandum of Understandings with Police Scotland, Crown Office, Procurator Fiscal. From our perspective, though, on this, it's overall a well-run set of processes that we've looked at in relation to the handling of evidence and the procedures which we have looked at around this. Again, I would be welcome to have any particular comments from management or indeed questions from the committee on the assumption that the paper has been read, understood, and any main points are to hand for people.
Okay. Thank you very much. And in terms of management, I think we have Jennifer Muir from Forensic. We do, Jennifer. I can see you on screen.
Okay, hello.
Thank you. Jennifer, I mean, would you like to comment on the management actions?
Yeah, so just thank you very much for the feedback during the audit and also the recommendations. Yeah, as Matthew points out, there are a number of areas that we have identified that we need to take forward. I think it's worth noting, particularly around the MOU, the recommendations are certainly underpinning the direction we're moving in anyway with the MOU development, which has obviously been reported to the Forensic Committee. So welcome their feedback on that. And for assurance around the management action around the data security audits, we have increased the capacity with the establishment of the forensic systems support team. So with that team now being sort of set up within forensic services, we will now have that resource to conduct the audits in line with the schedule that we're going to be setting out for 21-22. And finally, just around the governance, the record keeping, that will be escalated to the FPIC and FPOG chairs for noting when they meet in Q1, I believe.
Thank you. And at the risk of the chair giving evidence, because I'm on the Forensic Service Committee, this is very live. A very live issue for the committee, and indeed we meet next week, so we'll get a progress report, and then the intention is that the final MOU will be presented to the committee in May 21, but rather as the analysis of the recommendations in relation to the SPA. There are things that are wholly within forensics control. There are things which actually require others, and the MOU is a particular case in point because it's not even just Police Scotland, it is, as is set out here, the Fiscal Service and PERC.
Yep.
So, yeah. But that's, I certainly have an assurance that it's a very live issue.
Yes.
And that date looks correct, we are assured. Any questions from Grant? Observations?
No questions. I think it's a very reassuring report. One of the things that has been very evident is that forensic services cope with an ever-increasing volume of activity every year, and there's greater demand really almost every time we hear about it. So it's actually very reassuring to know that the controls are in place and are operating as intended.
Thank you. Matt?
No, Chair, very little to add. I mean, I was going to ask about the MOU, but you've given assurance on the basis that forensic will be meeting soon, and I think we'll have it, you said, by May. That sounds...
well, that is what we are told.
But it's nice to hold the chair of audit responsible for that. So I'm quite happy with the progress that's been reported. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lynn, do you want to, because forensics sits within SPAs, anything you want to comment on?
No, I have nothing to add. Thank you, Chair. I know Forensics Committee are very much focused on this, so thank you.
Okay, any thoughts? If not, no, thank you. Good to see such a satisfactory report and progress. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
So thank you all very much, and indeed, Graham, you're wanting to contribute, of course. You're on mute, Graham.
Sorry, apologies. So I just wanted to ask Chair if it would be appropriate for this internal audit report to be reported to the Forensic Services Committee.
Not only appropriate, that it would be my expectation. So yes, it definitely would be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all very much indeed. Well, we're doing remarkably well because we're actually running ahead of time, ahead of my indicative timings. I think I am conscious that other people, particularly Michelle Miller, our board member, who is our whistleblowing champion, will intend to join us for the whistleblowing progress. So I don't want to anticipate too much. On the other hand, it's quite a break. Would people be content to at least look at the internal audit plan at this point? And then that's quite a good, we've dealt with all matters of internal audit, and you have in mind, I think it's probably a good moment to think about looking at the future. Would be content with that? And then we'll break. Okay, so thank you very much. So Gary, if I put you on notice, as it were, but we were going to start with, I think, an overview from John of the process that we followed, which would you like to introduce, John?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, what I would say is this is a slightly new report for ARAC, and actually if we go back to Gillian's comments earlier, this is really, I suppose, a move for the SPA to be a bit clearer on its ownership of internal audit, which I think is where we're starting to get to. And this paper really provides you with an overview of the process that SPA is involved in, the setting of the internal audit plan, and to give you that level of assurance that will allow you to hopefully recommend a plan. So if I could direct you to the appendix of the report, starting on page 2, I'll just talk through some of the highlights. This page really just gives you that context for where internal audit sits within the SPA's wider excellence framework. Internal audit is part of the third line of defence and really a key element, but just one element of the wider system of assurance. If I move to page 3, this diagram does quite a lot, but it really tries to just summarize in one page the whole process that we've been going through over a couple months actually, to get to this point where we have an internal audit plan in front of you. So I would really just emphasize a lot of work's been done, primarily, first of all, considering risk and the risk registers throughout, as well as other factors, including the environment, the experience of assets and information from other assurance providers, including Audit Scotland and HMICS. And then we had quite a lot of work over the last month or two, including the board risk session, where we considered members' views. And at the same time, we did a very good risk review of the strategic risks, where we were able to use a lot of the feedback from there to inform your thoughts on what would be useful for internal audit. And at the same time, we've also had discussions with SPA management and Police Scotland to bring in their views. It's been a lot of work that's gone on to get to this point of a plan. If I move on to the last page, page 4, there's a small diagram on the right-hand side, which really just, again, gives you a snapshot of the plan that's being proposed and Gary will talk to you about. And that snapshot is based on the 4 themes within the excellence framework. So you can see the kind of the breadth and the size of the different audits that are being proposed for the year ahead. And what I would say, just to summarize all of this, AZETs are about to propose their internal plan, but we in SP are satisfied with the approach that's been taken to develop that plan. We think that it provides you with appropriate coverage across the audit universe, and it responds to risk appropriately. And also I would say that Lynn, as accountable officer, has been involved and is able to endorse the plan as well. I'd just finalise by saying that SPA's involvement just doesn't stop here with the completion and hopefully approval of the plan. We're going to be involved on an ongoing basis with AZETs in the internal audit reports, developing scope documents, and also we're talking to AZETs just now about how we, on an ongoing basis, monitor audit quality, and I'm hoping to do something a little bit different there as well. Happy to take questions. I think Lynn wants to come in.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Just to emphasise that John has set out quite clearly the methodology around this and what's been taken into consideration, and hopefully Gillian will be reassured we are starting to move towards what she's would expect us to do, is have ownership of internal audit issues, and this is a first step in doing that. I just want to thank John and Graham Stickle for all the work they've put into this. It has been done just over the last couple of months, but very thorough. I endorse it as accountable officer. I'm obviously happy to have any questions from from ARAC and any views that you have and any clarity that you require. But at that, I'd like to pass over to Gary, Chair. Thank you.
Okay.
Chair, maybe just for me, I think this is a step change in the excellence framework. I really welcome this report. In fact, when I read it, I was thinking this is something I should really be using in my other audits. I think John and the SPA have done a tremendous job here of really putting a great framework, and I think in my head it's a step change framework in how they provide assurance, which goes beyond internal audit. But obviously, the focus of the plan for now is the internal audit programme. I was also really pleased. I think the diagram that you see in John's report echoes. I was really pleased when I saw it. It led me to think I should be doing something like this more widely with my other audit committees. One of the things I've been saying about direction of travel and internal audit is, as the organisation, Police Scotland and the SPA, matures and its corporate governance systems, risk systems, internal control systems mature, that's the time to pivot internal audit. I think lots of internal audit work looking back has been about fixing the roof stuff. It's about identifying a systematic way areas of the organisation which need quite significant improvement, and I think we've all recognised those. But those corporate functions, I think, are starting to mature really well, and the focus on internal audit, you can see in John's little diagram, is more towards supporting the organisation become more efficient, more effective, particularly in facing some of the challenges. So you can see the efficiency side of the plan is where that focus is starting to be. My own perspective is that's the right place for us to be in internal audit right now. And I think that reflects the maturity of the organisation on that journey. Yeah. And introducing the plan itself, you can see that we, again, thanks to John for summarising, it's a really involved process. This has taken us 3 or 4 months of really strong engagement with the SPA side and through the SPA with the board to understand, and obviously we work with the audit committee for every meeting, and we have lots of discussions with you. So we've factored all of that in. We've had really detailed discussions with Police Scotland and their governance board, and quite a really informative session to understand risk from Police Scotland's perspective, and all of that goes into the mix and ends up with the plan that we are presenting to you today. So the plan, I don't intend to talk through every single detail of the plan, but I do think it contains, as Lynn has said, my own perspective is it's got the balance right. There's always a limit on, we've got 500 days, so we could always cover other things, of course we could, but I think the plan captures that balance based on all of that work. So I think it really is the committee's plan in a way. So it's over to you to tell us what you think.
So I think just before we look at the detail of the plan, just going back a bit to reflect. I mean, as you know, I personally welcome diagrams, and I really like this dartboard. I mean, both the explanation of the methodology of the approach is very helpful. The dartboard approach, because exactly as you say, internal audit, but I think this can also be used more widely for other initiatives and things. That business about pivoting from fixing the roof into maybe and getting the right balance between those different aspects of the excellence framework and effectiveness, and that does impact for me on the internal audit plan. And I think something I mentioned right at the outset is effectiveness and following through on impact as an aspect of effectiveness. I wonder if that's something we might pick up. But certainly from my point of view, I find this introduction, an explanation, methodology, the approach enormously helpful, and I think really very well done. But I preempt what, in fact, my fellow committee members might think. Grant, anything on the cover paper, and then we'll move to the internal audit plan.
Thanks, Chair. And certainly, I would completely agree with your comments about the presentation of this. I was trying to decide whether I was looking at a curling rink, the head of a curling rink, or the dartboard, and I'll stick to the dartboard. I think that's an excellent way of pulling it all together. These diagrams are extremely helpful. I don't in any way underestimate the amount of work required to get there, but I think being able to see it presented in this way is extremely helpful, and commend the people who've been involved in doing it.
Matt?
Yes, Chair, I'd endorse that. I mean, very often with diagrams, when you're faced with them, you wonder just what it's all about. And these ones, your first reaction, well, my first reaction is that's complex, but then it flows right through. So I think on the basis of what Gary's been saying, that John and Graham should go out and get the patents and the copyright for this before it goes any further.
Well, there we go. We'll put them up for an excellence award somewhere. Okay, Gary.
Just two things, Chair. One is John mentioned that one of the things this enables you to do is to move on to the next stage on internal audit. One of the things that we're working with John on is how do you assess audit quality and impact? And you've mentioned that. But I think that should be something we are coming back to you with in due course about how do you gain confidence that the work we're doing is having the impact you hoped for when you set it. And I know that John's got some really strong ideas on that. And the other area, and it's just for noting really, is we're currently doing some work with Andrew Hendry's team on DDICT, because that is a big area for development for Police Scotland going forward. What's on my mind about that is that may well highlight risks that we don't know yet. You don't know what you don't know. So we've done all of this work, but that more detailed work in a really important area for Police Scotland may well throw out some risks we just haven't thought of at this point. And it's worth keeping close to that, I think. And we'll be working with Lynn and John to report back on whether any risks emerged from that work.
I think that's a good segue into the plan itself, because I think, if I read you right, I mean, the plan uses up, there's not much contingency in here. The 500 days are very fully allocated. And so that was one of my first questions, is not whether these things are desirable, they clearly are, but whether it might be have been appropriate, or whether, given that sort of risk horizon that you're talking about, we need to build in a bit more contingency. That was one of the thoughts in my mind. But in terms of how you've structured it and the priorities, you explained the methodology, that the Lynn is content. I think maybe I had a question or two around perhaps a couple of them, but let me ask other committee members as well. Grant, any particular issues to pick out?
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the bit that I was looking for.
All right. Matt, while Grant's looking, anything from you particularly?
2 parts here. The one you've already touched on, the contingency days, very few in a world that fast changes and where you might have to reconsider the programme. The other one is on health and safety. I'm particularly pleased to see that in there. 40 days allocated, I think, in the plan. I don't know if that is a sort of norm for doing that type of work, because health and safety has come so far up the agenda now as an important area for us to be looking at. And the other thing is just in relation to that is, when you're doing that work, could I ask Gary, do you bring in any other expertise on that? Because it is an area which has real difficulties in some of the complexities involved in health and safety.
Maybe just so health and safety, this is a big and complex organisation, so the number of days just simply reflects this quantum and the complexity of the health and safety response. So internal auditors are experts in process and risk. We're not experts in health and safety. Yes. And what we don't want to be doing, so the Police Scotland employs people whose career jobs are health and safety roles, and they are experts in their area. What the audit will do is provide you with assurance that they are following good practice and there are no gaps in the approach to health and safety, rather than provide you with assurance that health and safety is compliant with the ISO standard in health and safety. We have, incidentally, we do this type of audit at a whole host of bodies, and we have in the past brought in an expert on health and safety at the request of a client. So, but this was where the risk was that they had gaps in their health and safety division, and they were quite concerned about that. That's not the case. We've not had that feedback back from Police Scotland that they feel there is that gap. So I don't think that is appropriate, that we need in this case to bring in health and safety experts. What you'll find from the report, is probably worth waiting to see the report. I've seen lots of these, and the quality of the findings that often come out tend to be really quite strong, and it will give you lots of assurance. And I think you should wait and see how this one works, and we'll get some feedback from John. That feedback process and impact process will be we'll be better able to provide you with, did it cover everything that you would expect? From where I sit right now, I think this is the right one to be doing in the right way. And then if we need to do any additional work, and I don't think we will, but if we do, then that's the time to think about whether or not we need to bring in experts.
Thank you.
Okay. Lynn, is it? Yes, Lynn? On mute.
Apologies, Chair. I'd like to say something about the contingency and sort of my view on that, if I may, because there is a balance, as the committee are sort of highlighting. I suppose for me, what's really important is that the internal audit work is done in time to inform the accounts, and you've heard today that this is the first time that will have been done, and part of being able to achieve that has been pretty clear with internal audit what we'd like the work plan to be going forward, and therefore that's why the contingency isn't that significant, because we've got a really I think a really good programme to be delivered. There is always the opportunity to change as we go forward, or to add days if we really feel there's something really crucial, but that's why it's been designed as it has. So Gary and his team can know exactly what they have to do and when, so they can deliver that certificate in May 2022.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Same perspective. Thank you. Grant?
Thank you, Chair. I've now found the reference I was looking for. It's actually project number C2 in estate management. Whilst I don't doubt that the scope of the review should be done at some point. I did wonder, bearing in mind some of the comments that have been made as a result of home working from COVID and so on, that although we got an estate strategy at the board about 18 months or so ago, it's quite clear that things have changed a great deal, and the amount of office space and police station space and what have you that was being foreseen going forward when the estate strategy was being produced, I think is a bit under review at the moment, and there may be some further developments coming through as further consideration is given to the amount of space required and where it might be. So I just wondered, in fact, that doing it in 21-22, this review in 21-22 is the right time for that. But maybe people like James and others will be better placed to comment on that than I could be. I don't disagree that the project should be done. It's just a matter of the timing of it.
Yes, and indeed, James is poised to answer that, I think. James?
Thanks, Chair. It's a fair point on the estate strategy and how that might need to be amended in the future in light of what's happened around, you know, home working and what the future might look like. What I would say on it is, our initial assessment is we don't think it fundamentally changes the estate strategy. It maybe just acts as an accelerant, because we were already planning to reduce the estate footprint, make better use of public sector assets by co-locating, moving to having desk ratios of 7 to 10 rather than 1 for 1. So that's all about shrinking the footprint. And then I suppose the internal space design is the bit that would maybe need to be reflected if we were to see more home working and therefore kind of a hot desking and kind of collaboration spaces. So that is something we need to look at. But this review, as set out here for next year, my understanding of it through the discussions we've had is that this would be more looking at the kind of nuts and bolts of the operational management of the estate, and that, you know, irrespective of where the strategy takes us to around how many buildings and how they're set out, that doesn't remove the kind of needs for us to make sure that we're managing a hard FM, soft FM, doing the repairs and maintenance and the nuts and bolts of things where we know we've had issues and issues continue to arise. And I think for me, I would find this, you know, as management, a really helpful review to understand, you know, if there are issues, exactly where they are and what's causing them, so that we can target our attention to addressing those, because we're constantly, you know, picking up bits and pieces around failures in buildings. So we know the roof came in Broughty Ferry. Now we say, well, that's about underinvestment in the estate, but actually by doing this review, really understanding, well, yes, we know there's underinvestment, but for what we do have, are we prioritising that into the right areas based on data-driven decision making? So I can see some real value in this, that and any learning that comes out of it, I think, because it's operational, would be equally applicable into the future, even if we had a different model around our estate. So I can see real value in it.
Okay.
Resource allocation at its best, I think.
Right. Okay, that's extremely helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Lynn.
Yeah, Chair, can I just maybe add to James's comments? And he set out quite clearly, this is a nuts and bolts review, and it is one of the areas that we are challenged on by when we give evidence to Justice Subcommittee on budgets, when we give evidence to BAPLs. And in fact, I see it in the same sort of way that Gillian earlier on talked about the COVID report and how we went in to test things, and this is what this is doing. So it's not the overall strategy, it's very much that focus on our repairs going forward. So thank you, Chair.
That's cool. Can I go to the other end of the spectrum, as it were? This is about, and that's in the nature of the internal audit plan, that's about nuts and bolts. But we've then got, if you look, reflecting on risk, and the things we've discussed at C10, change management is into next year, and TCSS implementation at D1 is also into next year. It seemed to me, I wondered whether one or other of those might more usefully fall into this year. It just seemed to leave it for, in essence, 2 years left some really significant issues where we know there are risks, we've got recommendations, and whether it is by way of new audit or whether it's by way even of follow-up on the efficiency side to some of the work you've done. And it just seemed to me to put both of those, and if you take both of those together, they are enormous. Both of those 2 years hence is what was the rationale for that, I think. Gary, is that one for you?
Chair, could I maybe come in from my perspective before Gary puts more right? We've just had a report today on the whole benefits tracking, and we've had a very detailed explanation from Andrew Hendry as to how Police Scotland are going to integrate that whole process in a much more visible way, and we're going to look at the governance around that. So the view of this was that that's happening this year, and that would need to bed down. In that there will be feedback on TCSS, there will be feedback on the whole change management during that process. So this is internal audit coming in and testing all of that going forward as well, and rather than doing something that's really been taken forward in this year. So it's not been ignored is what I'm trying to say, Chair. It will come through our change management governance already. This would be internal audit testing that. So I'm content that it would be in those years for those reasons. But Gary may want to add that. Something.
Actually, Lynn, I was going to say something really similar to what you've just said. I think this has received lots of internal audit attention. Management are on a change programme to implement architecture you mentioned earlier, Chair. I think you need time and space to do that. And our follow-up programme will come back in the normal way and tell you what progress is like in implementing all of the recommendations that are already in the system. I think management need time to get it right, and I think I agree with Lynn for what it's worth, that we should give them that time and then come back.
I think I'm content on the condition, on the assurance that the feedback for the progress reports on the internal audits that we've had and the totality of the reporting actually provides us with updates. Regular updates. Okay, it was just important to be sure that it was visible and being followed through. Yeah, okay. James, you have your hand up. Is that a legacy hand by any chance?
I was going to say something, but I think it's been covered, so yeah, I'll take it back down. Thanks.
Okay, fine. Okay, so the question then for the committee, and then the next step of the process is, if the committee agrees with this, it makes a recommendation to the board, and the board approve the internal audit report, which again makes for greater visibility and greater ownership by the SPA of the totality of this. Are board members content then with given that discussion, and I think it will be very helpful, Lynn, James, as you present to the board to offer that bit of context for those choices. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Good, thank you very much. That brings us then to 12:30. So I think that's more or less back on track. If we take half an hour for lunch, as was more or less intended, and resume at 1 o'clock with agenda item 5, whistleblowing, and I'm hoping that yes, and I think we can alert people attending for the second part that we're just slightly ahead of time. Thank you all very much indeed. So I think if you turn off cameras and mute, but remain logged in. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair.
to the rest of the session for this to be for very myself during I shall board member who so we have a paper from the SPA so the SPA's activity and oversight, and then one from a piece. Lynn, are you going to introduce the first report from the SPA? Got a hand up, is that something to know?
One is hoping to join back in, and John just wants to leave.
Sure, John can, because you, I think, were primary for this report.
Is within the provided essentially an update on the policy prior to the annual update. So the first area is on outlining about the annual update and that stage, and linked into the occasion we carried out the first 6 months of June report which identified what we had expected, that obviously the organisational numbers, so there's taking to define actually the annual update is meaningful to the committee. So as a result of that, what we are seeking to do is carry out a self-assessment process, our policy procedures, one of the reasons that number also looks at and oversight, and then supplement you would find but the annual process that was always and the so briefly is engagement. The paper was approved in discussion about exploring the option of a discussion on the key point the paper members is the most important for the is have meaningful players working for each other and only recognizing that can sharing good practice and important as well, which stuff we have in place. And then the third key element relates to the review and highlights the take place to both policy, but also the committee itself considers how the will set and when you look at the nature of like that with our plan for those are the areas and
that report. Michelle, it's appropriate to ask you if that particularly in the planning that reflects Thanks, Chair, and thanks, John, for the update.
procedures that are consistent with good practice, with law, and with proper principles of governance. Ultimately, anything else is about opinions. There is nothing for me about the system that is as streamlined as possible and as least confusing to people as possible. So I think we should move with those kinds of principles rather than any kind of fixed system like this or Scotland like that. So I think that's really important. For me, I think what's going to be critical though, and I get really the size of the SA is the likelihood of the numbers being higher. You know, it's not likely the numbers will be high. It's something in there for me about the number is not the issue really. It's the response to the individual personal group. So it doesn't matter whether there's 1,000 or there's one. If we get the response to the appropriate one, and the person feel that is to and validate in terms of whatever it is they're saying, feeling. But before that, almost, there's something to me about how critical it is for people to feel comfortable about using the system. You know, so you don't know whether there's one person, there's 1,000 people that are comfortable about using the system and have chosen not to, or there's one person, there's 1,000 people who thought about it, but actually felt that they were on by complexity or distrustful of the system or whatever. And we don't have absolutely no reason to think that anybody would be mistrustful. But the point is we need a system where people are comfortable about using it, and then the numbers of people who use it, therefore relevant data, because we know that people will use it if they chose to, and that is important. There's something about access to the system, confidence in the system, and then the last bit for me is about how we respond, and as some of these comments will I'll keep for later. I think they probably relate as much and equally to the Scotland and their report. What we do with that information to learn as an organisation and do that process. So the short answer is yes, and the long answer kind of fills in some of the issues. I think it's not necessarily today, you just have to progress as we use the policies of learning as a learning tool.
And I think you're absolutely right that those observation specialists on the risk of hearing in relation to SCA have a single subcommittee. It was your Scotland, where it is statistically the numbers are very small indeed, as we see when we look at the data. Again, the same but in terms of the importance of SPA moving to improve the issue that we have the right process in place, I think it does outline what that is to these various questions in mind. Yeah, okay, thank you. And I think broadly you can show your single champion if you consent. That's the right first step of the process. Some of the issues to be addressed, including, I think, the cut isn't quite the reporting then comes out of that's a process. And that's right. Okay. Thank you. Grant. Any questions from you?
Thank you. It's I just wondered what we were going to do about section 5.1 and the chief executive's comments about, for example, whether PERC required to consider internal changes prior to implementation of the recommendation for legislative changes and so on. How are we actually moving forward with these things? Because there are one or two items like that somebody's got to take some action, and I just wasn't terribly sure who was going to take the action and what timescale. And maybe John could clarify.
I see Lynn's got a hand up.
It might, sorry to cut across, I'm wondering if that might be more appropriately sit with Lynn.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies. my internet went down, so I was late getting back into the meeting, so apologies for that. Yes, in terms of what we were doing in this report, we thought was really important was to pull out of the Dame Eilish report what was relevant to whistleblowing. However, taking forward the Dame Eilish Angelini recommendations is a major exercise that involves the Scottish Government, Police Scotland and ourselves. And there is an oversight group looking at that, working with those three bodies. There was a report, as you appreciate, grant to the board last week from Robin Johnson setting out what our response was to that. Yes. And that is all getting taken forward. In fact, as you know, one of our long-standing members of staff is moving over to work with the Scottish Government to actually be part of that team. So the intention here was to draw it to your attention that there is something about whistleblowing, but it will be taken forward as part of that whole programme.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Lynn. Sorry, when I mentioned saying John commenting, I hadn't realised you'd come back onto the call. My apologies.
It's fine. Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Matt,
could a couple of points, but could I follow up on that point that Lynn was discussing there about the role of that group who are looking at the whole Dame Eilish report? I mean, although you say in the report requires legislative change, it could be done without legislation in terms of this particular aspect if there was agreement within that group. Would that be fair to say?
I would be nervous to give a legal view on an issue. If it can be done without legislative change, and that's what the group are saying to the Scottish Government, because what they're doing now is they're looking at all the recommendations and what is agreed, what requires legislative change. So if it can be done without that, we will take it forward as far, as appropriate. Yeah.
Right, thanks. More generally, Chair, that's much a question, just an observation. Thanks to John and indeed Michelle for her input today. I think the important paragraph is paragraph 4.3, which is recognising that we have robust policies both within SP and Police Scotland, and it would be nice if we had a commonality of policy. It's not essential, and indeed that issue of whether the trade unions have yet agreed it. I know those discussions will continue. But at the end of the day, we have those policies on board. The one thing I'm slightly not concerned about, but point to is that although we have only one case, in organisations which are comparatively small and have very few cases, very often the whole process becomes forgotten about because it's just not used. And I'm sure that we'll take steps to ensure that it's always to the forefront and always available to those who might wish to use it.
Mm-hmm. But that use and the lessons, the confidence and the lessons learnt are germane to the SPA through one perspective and Police Scotland. I think that's the same questions through another. Okay. I think then on the basis of that report, the committee and indeed the whistleblowing champion are content, subject to any comments that Gary is about to make, with where the SPA are in terms of their own process, and will then go on to look at Police Scotland and the oversight role which we play in respect of that. Gary, you wanted to?
I just wanted to make a comment, Chair. Michelle was outlining a list of themes, and one of the themes that I recognise from previous work in this area has been around when a whistleblowing event is classified as whistleblowing. So the definition of when it's in scope and when it's out with scope, and that can be quite critical in confidence and in the process. And the where Police Scotland is a unique body, and it has it does have an approach to what's in scope and what is out. It's just to raise that as a theme. It's not to say that it's wrong or anything like that.
Yeah. No. Good. Fair comment. Lynn.
Thank you. Just to reassure ARAC that in the report site that we will be reporting annually to you on the policy and how it's been implemented and lessons learned. So hopefully that will pick up the concern that Matt might have that this doesn't get the attention that it needs. We intend to do that through reporting to you and being held account to this committee.
Yeah. And that was the purpose, well, one of the purposes of the annual report, because what we're faced with, I think, is a bit of underinvestment in the process within the SPA. Okay, that's fine. If we could move on then to...
Sorry, Chair, could I just come in?
course.
Yes,
Yes, Michelle.
Yeah, sorry about that. It was just to come back on Gary's point, which I think is a valid one. And again, it's about how the organisation or organisations make people feel in terms of any concerns that they raise. So I think that it's absolutely critical that we have a definition of what is whistleblowing and a kind of gatekeeping arrangement around that, but that the intention behind that is not to deflect concerns away from the organisation, but to make sure they go to the right place. Yeah. So if it's, well, it's not whistleblowing, but it is X, Y, or Z, then there needs to be a clear route that is well communicated to the person, and that the person's supported to pursue the issue down that appropriate route, rather than say, well, it's not whistleblowing, so thank you and good night, as it were. So it's just to make sure that inevitably we have to have definitions and access criteria, etc., for all of our systems, but just to make sure that they're inclusive rather than exclusive in intent, I suppose is what I would like to see.
Okay. And indeed, that on that basis, whoever's going to present, I think is going to be Alan, the Police Scotland report. Perhaps, Alan, you could specifically address that in relation to Police Scotland report, but I'll bring in Gillian. Had your hand up. I'm sorry, Gillian, I missed that.
No, very, very briefly, Chair, I absolutely welcome all of the work that's been underway with respect to whistleblowing, conscious of previous scenarios and so on. The importance is that it's accessible to those that are interested, and either myself or my colleague Pauline online can readily access it on the SPA website at the moment. So just by way of, there's been such a big investment in all of this, but if it's not readily accessible to somebody who's concerned and a potential whistleblower, maybe just want to rectify that quite quickly.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And moving on to Police Scotland, and Alan Steers, you've given us a report, and while you can highlight anything you'd like to raise in this, and then those questions which have been raised, it would be very helpful to work through those.
Sure. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Chair. I have been leading on whistleblowing on behalf of the Chief Constable now for probably 4+ years within Police Scotland. So just a couple of comments, and I agree with a lot of what I've heard over the last 10 minutes or so. We first introduced a whistleblowing policy in February 2017 and refreshed that policy in 2019. I guess in doing the refreshment of the policy, we were really focused on training and awareness. So we did a number of things, which included a Moodle package for all our officers and staff across the force, as well as specialised training for a number of staff whose role was in and around the assessment of whistleblowing matters. And that for us is really, really important, how we handle that information. And I have a small specialist team who are looking at every single referral coming through our gateway unit and considering whether or not it meets the threshold for whistleblowing. In the preparation of the second report, we did a lot of benchmarking across the UK, gave evidence at one of the Home Office committees at Westminster on whistleblowing, and that led to a piece of work that we undertook with Whistleblowing UK, and also some additional work with an organisation called Protect, who are experts in whistleblowing. So we were really keen to ensure that we had a fair degree of external endorsement or verification of the processes that we have in place. So post 2019, her focus has largely been on training and comms across the force to maximise the awareness of the policy, and equally to ensure that we get everyone trained to the right sort of level. I, like Michelle, would make the observation that success on whistleblowing is not about the number of referrals. I think within Police Scotland, we pride ourselves in there's a whole raft of different ways in which you can raise concerns, and it would be our hope that whistleblowing may be one of the kind of last resorts almost. So we've seen a very small increase over the last 3 years of matters which we've specifically classified as whistleblowing. But for me, it's less about the numbers and more about the process and the awareness. So our plan over the last 6 months would have probably been to do further CDP training, to do further comms, and just increasing the awareness. We've obviously had some implications on the back of COVID that's probably pushed some of that a little bit along. But I'm pretty confident that, you know, we've had now 4 years of a policy. I would be bold enough to say that we're probably ahead of a lot of the UK forces in terms of our approach to whistleblowing. But as a whistleblowing champion within Police Scotland, we're not complacent. So the training, from my perspective, and the awareness and comms needs to be an ongoing thing. So that's probably an overview that I would provide you. I report internally through the Senior Leadership Board to the Chief Constable, and take a report there probably a couple of times a year, and probably focus on just some of the detail that's contained within this report today. Happy to pause there, and if I've missed anything, I'll pick it back up.
Thank you. Thank you. So some common themes there. I think, yes, has that addressed Michelle's questions? And we'll come back to her at the end, perhaps. Matt, any?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Alan, for that update. The report's very honest. I mean, you do make the point in the report that there's a nervousness among some district divisional managers about taking this forward, and clearly you're undertaking training, etc., to deal with that. But at the outset of your statement there, you were saying that when reports come in and assessments made as to whether or not whistleblowing is a feature, and the numbers have gone up over those referrals, do many of them come in as whistleblowing, and directly that people will assert this is a whistleblowing complaint rather than just something that's identified within PSD?
Yes, is a short answer to that, Matt. I think what we're finding is there is a small number of instances where somebody asserts that they are a whistleblower, and we would wholeheartedly agree. There's equally a number of instances of people report matters where they consider themselves to be whistleblowers, and perhaps they are not. I think, again, what becomes more important to me is about us doing the right thing and about taking the right action, providing the right level of support for the officers and staff who are raising the concerns. So I think it's added a lot of value for us in that we've had our Gateway staff trained quite intensively in terms of understanding and fully appreciating whistleblowing. And I think when we were developing the policy in 2016 into 2017, there was lots of debate and discussion about, you know, when is whistleblowing, when is it not? And I think probably we've been able to add a lot of value through the external training that's been made available for the staff.
Thanks. Looking at the figures you've given, as I say, there's a year-on-year increase, and it's still comparatively small, but nevertheless, those are increasing. That of course could be a feature of people just recognising that they have a whistleblowing complaint. It doesn't mean that these are new issues. But in terms of the numbers you've had, which are comparatively low, and going back to Michelle's point, what sort of learning have you taken from this, and what have you built back into systems of consequence?
I think each set of circumstances has to be considered in their own merits, and quite often they're quite complex and very specific to an environment that somebody works in. But I think the first piece of learning we've taken more broadly is about our interaction with people, and probably ensuring that people feel valued and supported, and they don't feel negative in terms of the fact that they've had to make that report. So the support and welfare that we can put in place, particularly in instances where an individual might be classified as a whistleblower, is really, really important. I think for me, some of those matters are incredibly complex, and probably if I was to start to get into the detail of them, it would probably become very clear very quickly, sets of circumstances and individuals that I might be talking about. So I'm kind of reluctant to do that in this setting. But I think overlaying that with a continual push on training, awareness and communication for me is really, really important. So we've got a kind of programme of annual work, so that we're not just going to become complacent in terms of having that policy in place.
Okay.
And Chair, the Protect organisation for whistleblowing advice, that is readily available and known to people that that is something to which they can refer?
Yeah, we always recognised it was really important to have the opportunity for staff to go out with Police Scotland and to probably either seek advice or make a referral through an external organisation. And we work with Protect, which right now is a UK charitable organisation. If I'm honest, I did some time ago explore other options within Scotland, which included PERC, and at that time the Commissioner didn't see that as to be a viable option. So Protect wasn't, if you like, where we started. It probably kind of emerged as probably the right place for us to go at that point in time. And I guess we are, as you're aware, reflecting on some of the commentary from Dame Eilish as it relates to whistleblowing now.
Thanks, Joe.
And I think that Protect point is one that's relevant for the SPA to consider in terms of its own routes to reporting. Thank you. Grant.
Just one thing to clarify, Chair, and it's really, I know it's presumably the case, but is forensics included in all these communication channels with this? I mean, there's obviously, Alan's referred to information from Protect and so on. I just want to be sure that it's actually equally being communicated through SPA itself and forensics as appropriate.
That's a very good question. John, maybe you have the answer to this. You've got your hand up.
Sure. So obviously we have different policies and procedures. However, the opportunity to engage with Protect is within the SPA policy, which applies to corporate and forensics. What Police Scotland do is go beyond that in terms of other relationships they have with Protect, in terms of a package that it costs money, but the ability for free advice for individuals is embedded within the whistleblowing policy, which is on the front page of the intranet, and also so therefore is known to forensics and SPA staff within the policy.
But definitely a point to take up as you conduct the self-evaluation and any recommendations.
Yeah.
Alan, can I ask a question? I think I recognise all of the investment that's gone into the specialist teams, the training, the support, the awareness. So that is protecting and investing in the whistleblower. What's the outcome? In other words, can you, is there any information you can give about the resolution of those whistleblowing, and in terms of trend, you've classified them as whistleblowing. Have they all resulted in egregious issues which have had to be dealt with at the highest level by Police Scotland? Are they low level? They shouldn't be low level of whistleblowing, but there's just something about the outcome of all of this investment and the impact this has had.
Yeah, so from our perspective, every case is considered on its own merits, and if I'm honest, despite the fact that the number of instances are relatively small, they are quite varied, and I guess not in every instance does it probably result in an outcome that perhaps the whistleblower is ultimately entirely satisfied. But that's about us working with an individual and managing their expectations as well. So where we are drawing learning, we push that sensitively and appropriately into particular business areas, into some of our HR policies. And so we are kind of scrutinising every case on a case-by-case basis, trying to pull some of that learning and looking at how best we can take that forward. There is maybe something, Chair, for a future meeting and perhaps in the private session that we could come back and maybe bring a bit more detail just around some of the learning from this, because I thought we do have it and we do capture it. I think also on a positive note, there's a lot of instances where people are using other mechanisms to raise the same concerns. So I'm encouraged by that, and I can see lots of evidence about the flow of information into your gateway unit, that we're not utterly reliant on people having to utilise this policy. So I'm equally encouraged by that.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering, in the same vein, and this is possibly, might say, more historic, at 2.1.5, all of the investment that you've made in whistleblowing is sort of treated there en bloc. I wonder if is it possible to provide any evaluation or causal links to the changes? I mean, I think that's my question then, and perhaps for the future, in terms of your resource allocation and the rest. What are the benefits that you can track from that? But perhaps I flag that up as one for the future. Okay. And now you've got a good baseline. I think the reporting can look to the improvements, and maybe for both organisations, for both SPA and Police Scotland, are there any specific improvement plans? And it'd be good to look forward rather than just historically, so that in the first annual report, indicating what are the next steps and some timelines for what we would be looking to see achieved within the next year. It would be a useful approach. Matt?
I agree with that point, just a slightly different point, and that's the issue of reporting. As Alan well knows, in another place we have regular reporting of the whole issue of complaints within Police Scotland, and what part will whistleblowing play in that? Because if the reporting is to this committee, will there be I don't want to see any duplication there, but at the end of the day, the Complaints and Conduct Committee has that oversight of complaints from Police Scotland. So I think it'd be useful just to clarify where we are there.
I think that was my behind my question about the outcome, because yes, if you look at 2.8, 2.9, 2.10, it's reporting in 2019, are the 13 whistleblowing complaints part of the 2,419 complaints and referrals and whatever that Complaints and Conduct are looking at, or Complaints and Conduct are seeing the data analysed and the trends and the reporting?
Yes.
Alan?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point that Matt makes, and we take a lot of detail into the Complaints and Conduct Committee. From memory, I'm not sure if any time recently we've taken in an absolute breakdown of some of the whistleblowing matters, but we certainly break that down a little bit.
Just an aside, I did look last night at the last report we received, and it wasn't part of that, but I haven't gone back over all the reports, but certainly it's not been specifically reported on at the last meeting.
Yeah, I had a look as well, and that was my view coming to it cold.
So in terms of level of detail, Chair, this mirrors a similar report that I would take to the Chief Constable at our Senior Leadership Board. So I'm really sensitive to the confidentiality that surrounds whistleblowing. So a lot of the detail contained in here is what I would take on a 6-monthly basis into the Chief Constable. I guess it's really a matter for yourselves as the frequency of how Police Scotland reports on whistleblowing, and whether it's through this committee or into Complaints and Conduct, or a bit of both.
Oh, right. I think we'd established that, and Michelle perhaps can confirm, a 6-monthly report to the Whistleblowing Champion and an annual report to this committee, quite possibly there's a link over to Complaints and Conduct, but I may be wrong. Michelle, Michelle?
Yep, sorry, just taking time to get my camera on. So a number of different issues here, really. I think that was my understanding. I've got quite a number of kind of questions and thoughts on the report and the process. I don't know if you want to move on to those just now, or
Yes, by all means.
Okay, so a couple of things. first of all, I think it's really positive in terms of the emphasis that Police Scotland are putting on learning, on training, on bringing the whistleblowing policy and procedures to life. So I would want my other comments to kind of be seen in that light, because I take the point about how well Police Scotland is said to compare to other forces and other areas and so on, and all of that is really positive, and we should absolutely build on that. I suppose for me, though, there's a number of things. So my first thought when I read the report was, what is the status of this report? And in terms of what has been agreed, where does this fit? Because it felt to me, and I might be wrong, that this was a kind of, this is our update, but all of the kind of governance-rich reporting would look slightly differently, I suppose. And so that's my question is, where does that come and when? And I think we've already had some thoughts about where that could go. I get the issue about confidentiality and the sensitivity of that. And it may well be that the actual kind of core governance bit in terms of any of the detail may be better in a committee such as Complaints and Conduct, where that's already set up in that sense. But for me, as a board member, irrespective of any other roles that I might have, I don't think that this report satisfies the board's responsibility for governance in relation to whistleblowing. So, so my question was, is this just not just, but is this a kind of, this is what we're proposing to do and how we currently do it, and this is how we're going to go forward, and getting our thoughts on what that governance reporting might look like, because I think that needs to be the next step. Because within it, there's a number of kind of questions that I would have, which is around, and these link back to some degree to what I was saying earlier. On the one hand, I think it's good that more people are using it over the period that you've described, year 1, year 2, year 3, and so on. And that would suggest to me that people are more aware and perhaps more confident. But the numbers that are assessed as being whistleblowing within that process are very, very small. So 2 questions really, I suppose, but the main one is about where, what's the governance within Police Scotland to assure yourselves that that assessment about whether something is whistleblowing or isn't is a solid one? And secondly, where do the other 2,000, have they gone to complaints? And in which case, what's the number and proportion? Have they gone somewhere else? What's the feedback been to the people, raising the concerns? Has it been, well, this isn't a whistleblowing because it's something else, or this isn't whistleblowing because it just simply isn't? So just to get a better understanding of how people are responded to, but also the quantum of redirection, if you like, in terms of concerns that are raised. So there's a lot of questions in there for me. And then the other big theme is about, and I think we've touched on it already, is where are you reporting if you don't report quite rightly, the detail publicly, where are you reporting publicly through the SPA's governance process, and this is what we have done about it in terms of either changing our systems or providing training or whatever, so that the action and the improvement action and the learning is very visible as a part of the process. So I'm sorry, there's an awful lot of kind of thoughts and questions in there. So I'll pause there and see where we get to.
Well, I mean, one of the things is I hadn't thought, welcome as it is, I hadn't thought we were necessarily getting a Police Scotland update report to this meeting, welcome as it is, because it shows progress. I think the next step we had been focused on, and I think this is still to be true, is what does the annual report, an annual report following on from the approval of the policy earlier this year, an annual report that does indeed satisfy the SPA's governance responsibilities without being the executive action, because the executive action clearly sits with Police Scotland. So I think what we have here is some themes to be developed in both the regular reporting and the annual report, and a design of the annual report which is due to come to us in May, seems to me what has been highlighted throughout this discussion, and if so, who takes that forward? That design issue now, I seem to be losing pretty much everybody. Fiddle.
Oh, we've lost the chair.
Oh.
Can I maybe fill the space in, if that's all right, Lynn, and maybe just make a couple of comments? Michelle asked about 40 questions there, so I don't suspect I'll be able to answer them all. I think, firstly, Michelle, this was a report that I brought probably without a lot of steer as to what the committee would have wanted in the report. So, you know, quite right to consider what a report should look like. But this is my take on just where we are as an organisation with whistleblowing. I definitely think, based on your comments, there is a big crossover into the Complaints and Conduct Committee. So, you know, the large number of referrals or matters that are reported through our Gateway unit are carefully considered at the SPA Complaints and Conduct Committee, and probably the nature of them, I firmly believe that probably is in the right place. I think our governance arrangements are really robust internally in considering whistleblowing. So the head of professional standards is probably that first checkpoint and is reviewing that on a monthly basis. I thereafter have a monthly strategic meeting and then report into the DCC board and on to SLB, which is our senior leadership board chaired by the chief. So in terms of internal governance within Police Scotland, there's a number of checkpoints where we're carefully considering those matters on a regular basis. I think just in terms of the content of a more detailed report into SPA, it's probably for yourselves in determining what sits in this committee and potentially what sits in the complaints and conduct space.
I see that Jane's back.
I'm back, but please, Matt, carry on.
No, I hadn't started. I was just going to say in relation to that, Alan, I think an important feature of the discussion of Complaints and Conduct Committee is the report that you bring there of referrals and complaints, etc., goes to the public session. And I think there are a number of issues, particularly that might come out of whistleblowing complaints where we want to look at it a bit more in depth. That'd be much better taken in the private session. I don't think for a minute that can be done in that way. But beyond that, I think there's still the role for this committee in terms of that overall assurance that's required, and that's where that rests.
Yeah.
Could I just come back to Alan? I mean, I don't doubt at all the process that you've got in place. So I'm not casting any kind of aspersions on that. So don't misunderstand me. But I'm just thinking purely from a governance perspective, the fact that you have a system that says we have got a robust process for judging whether a complaint or an issue that comes in is whistleblowing or not, and that's robust enough for us, is how the SPA is assured that that process is robust enough, full stop, as opposed to robust for Police Scotland or robust enough for SPA. Or so my question is more around, you know, how that assurance is turned into something that the SPA can say, yes, from our perspective, those judgments that are made, you know, appropriately, etc. And I'm absolutely not saying that they're not. I'm saying I don't know how you get to there, and therefore whether the SPA, through whichever process we agree around governance, can say, yes, we're content that you're doing things in absolutely the right way. So it's really a question for all of us, you know.
If I can just make a comment first, Chair. I mean, I totally agree and understand your perspective, and I do wonder then if HMICS or even our internal auditors maybe at some point could have a closer look at whistleblowing and perhaps give you that level of assurance. I think that probably would be appropriate, and I actually probably would welcome that, because we would want to continue to grow and develop in terms of the robustness of our policies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do recognise that. I think that's a good point. I mean, what essentially we've got is level 1 and level 2 lines of defence, and we're looking for the level 3, not because I think we have concerns about 1 and 2, but just so that we have that independent validation of legal assurance to that level 1 or 2 is absolutely correctly applied in this really important area. So I think that's something definitely we are agreed that is the right line to consider. John.
Thank you. I hope this contribution is helpful, but it's just to touch in some of the points that have been made in the last 10 minutes. For SPA's approach to the distinction between internal governance and assurance, sort of independent assurance to the audit committee, we focused in on a previous internal audit report that talked about the importance of the audit committee getting a specific update on whistleblowing, specifically on the numbers, on the types, the lessons learned and the trends. What we've also, and links in with comments that everybody's been making, is for the rationale for our self-assessment. What we've sought to do in addition to that is use the self-assessment as a bit of a structure and a framework to give the audit committee the assurances that they're looking for based on what another organisation, reputable organisation, says and not what we say. So, but I think what that code of practice also highlights is the importance of the independent role that the audit committee or the ARAC plays for all organisations. So it's just about, and I just wanted to highlight, and I'll close here, the 6-monthly assurance process. It is for SPA, corporate and forensics to the whistleblowing champion. So Police Scotland do have their own internal assurance process, which is different, and it's just to avoid any sort of confusion about what we had outlined to the board in March. That was us outlining for SPA, corporate and forensics, and not speaking on behalf of Police Scotland, just to ensure there isn't any confusion there.
Absolutely. I think, in a sense, it shows how we've moved on from those internal audit reports, which are identifying the sort of factual that we've got here, and actually we're now looking for a greater granularity, as it were, of assurance. So I think these to be considered. It's always the point. I welcome the assurance. Show me the evidence. And it's a question of whether the internal is, in this case, sufficient. That's all. Okay. Lynn, did you want to add anything to this? No, indicating. Thank you very much indeed. Gillian Willman, anything you'd like to observe?
No, I'm aware of the content of the paper and the nature of the discussion that's followed, and can understand it's that closing the loop once again, isn't it? Yeah. From a governance perspective. So we'll pay attention to how this is working as we go forward. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. I think that was a good discussion. We're certainly making good progress. We'll look to see the annual reports from both. I do think maybe it's an action, in a sense I can leave with Lynn, if I may, but just about identifying who are the appropriate persons within SPA and then Police Scotland to look at the actual format design of the annual reports to make sure they cover all the issues that we've identified. I think that's probably the way.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We'll take that forward. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And then our final item in this public session is the Audit Committee work plan, which is simply a standing item. At the moment, what we have here reflects the past year. We haven't filled in because that's been subject to the approval of the internal audit plan, the various internal audits that will come to us over the course of 2021. But that, in bringing that to the board for approval, perhaps we can have an indication of what falls within quarter 1, 2, 3, 4. I think that would be helpful. Okay. Clearly, one of the major items for the audit committee to consider the accounts, and that in turn is dependent on obviously the internal work preparing the accounts, but also Audit Scotland. And Gillian, this is perhaps a moment to invite you to just comment on where Audit Scotland are at this point. That would be most helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And from my perspective, I see this 12-month plan already is up to date for 2021, in so much as you've penciled in the annual external audit plan for April 2021. That is later than as you would normally expect. We would normally hope to have it for this January meeting, so that members feel very well informed as to the audit risks that we've identified through the planning process. I think it will come as no surprise to members and others present today that the 2019-20 annual audit process was very challenging during a global pandemic and the move to remote working for both accounts preparers and for the auditors. So I know that this committee will be very familiar with the hard work of your own finance team, and working closely with external audit, we made the original deadlines for the 1920 audit. However, that was not the case for the majority of the public sector audits in Scotland for 1920, and indeed I think 3 or 4 councils will be signed off in calendar year 2021. However, Audit Scotland considers this to have been a very good result if we look more widely, and I think there's in excess of 200 local government accounts in England that have not been concluded. So whilst we're on the back foot relative to previous years, all things considered, not such a bad position. Our planning guidance to all auditors for the year 2021 has been issued. There is an attempt, it's a transition year, to catch up on the reporting relative to last year and trying to work our way back to the previous timescales during the year 2022. Chair, since issuing the planning guidance, of course, we've now gone into a further lockdown. So 2 days ago, we published COVID-19, what it means to public audit in Scotland. So I've had a chance to share that with the Chief Finance Officer as our main point of engagement, and perhaps he'll circulate it to members out with this meeting. But I think it is to manage everyone's expectations, Chair, about how we're going to accommodate all of the 2021 audits. As an organisation, we've moved into deprioritising certain audits. We're also deprioritising certain corporate activities. However, I don't expect that to have implications for the 2021 audit of SPA. We've already had many planning meetings with key officers. I know that Pauline and colleagues are drafting the annual audit plan. We expect to have that completed fairly soon, so it'll be well in advance of the April meeting, so that you're assured that audit work will be underway now with respect to interim testing for final accounts. I should say, although we went up all those learning curves a year ago, there are still some learning curves that are new to us, and that includes our interim audit work, which is compliance testing of systems. So again, we'll be working very closely with your officers to ensure that we can achieve all of that. And we don't anticipate challenges, but it is still new territory for us. But I hope members of the committee are assured we hope to get back on track, although during a compressed time frame, and other audits have been deprioritised for us to achieve those that are our priorities.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's very helpful context, and also very helpful indication that sort of, I think, as I might expect, we're not deprioritised, so we are still in your sights, and quite rightly so. I think it would be very helpful once the annual plan is available for it to be circulated to the committee, just out of committee, just so we're cited on that. Yep. So we are still working within that. We are still working to a May deadline of a first cut, as it were, and that's, I think, critically important, because that also impacts on elsewhere within the organisation, not simply the financial, but I think I'm thinking particularly of performance committee, which is reviewing the performance, and also for the board to be looking at the governance statement. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Any thoughts, comments? I might take just any immediate responses also from Lynn and from James before I invite Grant and Matt to further comments. Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Gillian for setting that out for us and giving us context to that. As you know, we are working already closely with our colleagues in Audit Scotland to be able to meet the deadlines around the accounts, and obviously we welcome their audit plan for the year after. Again, I'd just like to commend again James and his team and other colleagues within the SPA and forensics for meeting the deadlines for the 1920 accounts, considering that I heard the majority of Scottish public sector didn't do that.
I know we've set ourselves a very high bar, everybody collectively, I must say. James?
Thanks, Chair. I think Lynn's covered everything. We are working closely with Audit Scotland. We are working to the existing timetable despite further lockdown, and you know, if anything crops up, then we can let members become aware of that. But at the moment, the plan still holds. So, yeah, we'll work to that.
Okay, thank you. Matt, you think?
No further comment, Chair.
And Grant?
No, that's very helpful, very informative. Thank you. Look forward to seeing the annual plan coming through for the next ahead of the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. So the action, I think, from just this item is that it was very helpful if the Audit Scotland work plan was circulated, and very helpful in presenting to the internal audit plan to the board for approval to then reflect in this work plan how that we're going to divvy them up by quarter, so that we get a reasonable spread and not everything is pushed towards the end of the year, which I'm sure it won't be. Okay, thank you very much. That, I haven't been notified of any other business, so that therefore concludes the public session. Thank you very much indeed. We will now close the public session. We'll take a short break, which will enable live stream to be turned off, as it were, and then we will resume in private in 10 minutes time, or maybe 13 minutes time, because I make it sorry, maybe 30 minutes time. It's now just coming up to 2 o'clock. We'll resume at 2:10.